Positive affirmations. Affirmations are one of the oldest techniques for improving self-esteem. They are generally used to change beliefs. If I believe I'm a loser or I don't believe in my abilities, then I use positive affirmations to reprogram my subconscious mind and overwrite negative thoughts with positive ones. However, the biggest problem is that countless studies have found that they don't work. But why? Why doesn't repeating "I'm awesome" to myself help? They don't work for a very simple principle. Continuously repeating something that we believe is false won't change our minds. Need proof? Try repeating that you can walk on water. I have all the abilities to walk on water. Say it as many times as you want. What will happen? You certainly won't convince yourself that you can walk on water. If you believe you have low self-esteem and you're not worth anything as a person, you can't force yourself to change your mind with mere positive affirmations. If what you affirm is in stark contrast to a deeply rooted and unconscious belief, then an internal conflict will arise every time you use this type of affirmation. But what about all those who say positive affirmations have definitely worked for them? It's probably just an impression. Greenwald and colleagues demonstrated this over 30 years ago in the study Double-Blind Tests of Subliminal Self-Help Audio Tapes. The study involved 237 participants who were asked to repeat positive affirmations to improve their memory and self-esteem. 80 out of these 237 participants claimed that they believed their memory and self-esteem had improved, but unfortunately this was just a mere perception, an illusion. After some tests, they found that their memory had not improved at all, nor had their self-esteem. If your goal is to change your mindset, force yourself to believe you're beautiful, intelligent, lovable, or have great self-esteem, forget about positive affirmations. They only worsen your situation. There's much more to say about affirmations. Actually, there's a very specific case in which they can work. Let me know in the comments if you want a detailed video on the topic. Now, I'll rate the effectiveness of all these habits. The rating on affirmations, 2 out of 10. Dopamine detox. Detox is short for detoxification and can mean removal of addictive substances from the body or removal of poisonous qualities from the body. To cut to the chase, if a person were to ever remove all their dopamine from the body, terrible things would happen. Why? The answer lies in the definition of dopamine. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and, as such, essential for many vital functions of our body. One of these functions is motor control. I'm sure you've heard of Parkinson's disease at least once in your life, a disorder that causes involuntary or uncontrollable movements such as tremors, rigidity, and coordination difficulties. It's a disease that worsens over time and can lead to the inability to walk or speak. Parkinson's occurs for one reason only, because at least 80% of the body's dopamine-producing cells in a part of the brain die. Among its many functions, dopamine also regulates motivation and our mood. The idea behind the dopamine detox movement is not to remove dopamine from our body, but to reduce and, in some cases, eliminate all highly dopaminergic activities. These activities are the ones that make us lose motivation to do difficult but important things that bring us satisfaction. Playing video games, watching videos on YouTube or TikTok, watching porn, or eating ultra-processed food full of sugars and fats are just some of the activities that release a great amount of dopamine in our brain. None of these activities are inherently evil. What makes them harmful are the quantities and the addiction. Developing an addiction means being unable to control the instinct to watch another video, play another 5 hours on PlayStation, or eat that delicious pizza. Additionally, if all these behaviors cause problems in your life, such as being overweight, unable to work on your business, or doing schoolwork, then they become harmful. The problem is that at this point, doing homework or starting to work feels like the most boring and tedious thing in the world. On the contrary, engaging in all these dopaminergic activities is so easy and enjoyable. They help us release tension and feel better, at least in the short term. I say in the short term because then the guilt comes to devour us. Dopamine detox, therefore, consists of a period of abstinence from all these activities. This period will bring a lot of boredom, and boredom is positive. It means we are making progress. There will come a time when the boredom is so high that doing those things that were once difficult and boring but important won't be so bad anymore. In fact, you will regain the pleasure and satisfaction of doing them. Disclaimer: be careful about detoxing abruptly with certain substances, like alcohol or benzodiazepines, as you could risk your life. I recommend consulting a professional. Also, there are cases where dopamine detox may not help much at all. For example, in cases of severe depression, severe ADHD, and Parkinson's disease. These cases can only be effectively treated with medication. Even in these situations, seeking medical advice can be very helpful. Rating 8 out of 10. Monk mode. The name monk comes from the Latin word monachus. A monk is someone who voluntarily chooses isolation, originally for religious reasons. This lifestyle is characterized by strict discipline and abstinence from all forms of indulgence. Today, in the world of self-improvement, it no longer has a religious connotation, but aims to maximize productivity. For a predetermined period, it involves minimizing or even eliminating contact with other people unless it is functional to the set goal. Additionally, it involves eliminating all distractions that do not aid your goal. This means no outings, alcohol consumption, junk food, social media, or video games. Everything that is not related to the main objective is eliminated. One of the exceptions allowed in this mode is physical activity. Monk mode is a highly effective strategy, and many experience tremendous productivity and motivation during these periods. Some claim they can do in 1 month what they used to do in a year. Perhaps being 12 times more productive is an exaggeration, but the increase in productivity is incredible. Rating 8.4 out of 10. It's a wonderful tool, though the less pleasant and somewhat dangerous aspect is the tendency to continue this isolation for excessively long periods. Reading. Reading is fantastic. In 4 to 5 hours of reading, you can acquire decades of experience and research from experts in various fields. Personally, I believe reading is far superior to watching YouTube videos for one reason. It can take a person 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years to write a book. Creating a video can take some people a few hours, or at best a few weeks. The difference in time spent, research quality, and energy invested is evident in the final product. Rating 8.3 out of 10. Grounding. Grounding, also known as earthing, involves direct contact with the Earth's surface. For example, walking barefoot on the ground, sand, or grass. Hugging trees also falls under grounding. Proponents of this method claim that it allows the body to absorb electrons from the Earth, neutralizing free radicals, alleviating pain, and reducing inflammation. Although some small studies suggest possible benefits, rigorous studies have found none. The biggest issue with the few studies supporting this practice is methodological limitations, such as small sample sizes and the absence of control groups. Rating 4.9 out of 10. Physical exercise. Physical exercise not only makes us look better, but also boosts our energy levels, significantly increases our life expectancy, enhances our immune system, improves our mood, and reduces stress, among many other benefits. Do I need to say more? Rating 9.95 out of 10. Healthy eating. Eating healthy means minimizing or eliminating everything considered unhealthy food, such as fast food, sugary drinks, deep-fried foods, sweets, or ultra-processed foods. Just remember, not all processed foods are bad. For example, protein powder is processed food, but not harmful. Additionally, in very small quantities, none of these foods cause significant harm to a healthy individual. Eating healthy also means achieving a sufficient or preferably optimal ratio of proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Furthermore, it means trying to eat a varied diet to also meet our essential vitamin and mineral needs. Having a balanced and healthy diet is essential. Rating 9.61 out of 10. NoFap. NoFap involves abstaining from masturbation, with proponents claiming numerous benefits. However, research suggests otherwise, indicating that it's largely ineffective and may even be counterproductive. This is because the desire to masturbate can become so strong that it significantly reduces our willpower during the day and makes us more easily distracted. The only possible benefit is increasing your discipline by resisting temptation. However, this option quickly falls apart since you can train your willpower with activities that are actually beneficial, such as following a diet, exercising regularly, or meditating. The situation is different if there is an addiction to masturbation that reduces the quality of life. If you don't spend hours masturbating, you don't need to do anything. Rating 2 out of 10. Law of attraction became famous thanks to the book The Secret, is one of the most well-known nonsense concepts in the world of self-improvement. It involves visualizing achieving a particular result, such as earning $1 million. However, visualization must be done properly. It must be very vivid, and while doing it, you must feel all those wonderful positive emotions that you would feel after achieving your goal. This is crucial because the emotions you feel and the visualizations you make will resonate at specific energetic frequencies that will then attract from the universe what you desire. Promoters of this law of attraction talk about quantum mechanics and energies, understanding nothing about the subject. Not only does this crap not work, but it's absolutely counterproductive, and it has been demonstrated in dozens and dozens of studies. Scientific researcher Gabrielle Eddingen has extensively shown how visualization done following the principles of the law of attraction not only fails to achieve the desired goal, but actually significantly worsens the chances of achieving that goal. This deserves its own rating, -100 out of 10. Gratitude Journal. Humans are not naturally predisposed to gratitude. Most of us are wired to seek out and notice dangers and problems. This is at least according to evolutionary theory, which suggests that humans are programmed to survive. Often, being programmed for survival is at odds with the pursuit of happiness. If you were to ask a group of 1,000 people about their day, it's likely that the majority would recount negative experiences, discussing problems or areas where they fell short. It's a common human tendency to vividly remember the bad and quickly forget the good. This can lead to a distorted perception of life, where everything seems negative and terrible, even when it's not. Having a sort of gratitude journal forces us to remember the positive experiences we had during the day. This helps us put into perspective all the negative things and problems we encounter daily. But what if nothing positive happened to me during the day? We all have days like this. That said, remembering how fortunate you are can help. Remember that you don't have a terminal illness, that many of your loved ones are still alive, that you are self-sufficient, and that you weren't born in a third-world country where you risk starving to death. All these things can bring gratitude back into your life. Gratitude is an emotion that can be trained, and if one of your life goals is to be happier, training gratitude will undoubtedly help you achieve this goal. Among some of the studies demonstrating the effects of having a gratitude journal are Emmons and McCullough's 2003 study, Seligman and colleagues' 2005 study, and Wood, Froh, and Garrity's 2010 study. Rating 8.1 out of 10. Deep work. Deep work involves setting aside predetermined blocks of time to focus on working on something important. Usually, these blocks are taken at the beginning of the day before engaging with emails, social media, and various news. For a set period, for example, 90 minutes, one focuses solely on the most important task, eliminating all possible distractions. How do you find the thing to focus on? By answering the question from one of my favorite productivity books, what's the one thing you can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Rating 9.1 out of 10. Eat the frog. This involves completing the most difficult, frustrating, and boring task first thing in the morning, before anything else. The problem with this advice is that if the most annoying thing for you to do is household chores, then spending the first 60 minutes of your day doing a similar activity isn't the wisest choice. We all suffer from something called decision fatigue, which is the worsening of the quality of our decisions over time. Morning is when we are at the peak of our mental abilities. The more hours pass, the more tired we become. Therefore, it makes sense not to do the most annoying thing, but the most important thing. Answering the question seen in the deep work section. Rating 6.4 out of 10. Make your bed. This is a piece of advice that became very famous from the book written by William Harry McRaven, a U.S. Navy admiral and former commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, the organization responsible for killing Osama bin Laden in 2011. The make your bed concept is closely linked to the eat the frog philosophy. The idea is to do something that nobody likes, namely, making your bed. Make your bed comes from the idea that starting the day with a simple and productive activity can create positive momentum for the rest of the day. Although there are no specific scientific studies directly examining the concept of making your bed and its impact on discipline or productivity, it's something that many people say has helped them. Personally, I haven't noticed any benefits. Rating 6.2 out of 10. Morning sunlight. Going out in the morning first and foremost wakes you up properly. helps regulate circadian cycles, improving sleep, boosts mood, and facilitates the production of vitamin D. Although it's not the most revolutionary activity in the world, it requires little effort and yields excellent results. Rating 7.8 out of 10. Reflection Journal. It involves, at the end of the day, reflecting on how the day went, what you did well, what you think you could improve, how you felt, what were the prevailing emotions, how the day's performances were. If you made mistakes, ask yourself why and how you can prevent them from happening again. Not dedicating time to reflection eventually makes you hit a wall. You can't progress, you can't improve, and you can't solve the problems that come your way. Dedicating time to reflection is very useful in understanding if something isn't working, and with a bit of practice, you'll also be able to understand what isn't working, and then create a strategy to solve the problem. Not doing this process usually leads to finding yourself in one of the most commonly used defense mechanisms by people, known as avoidance. Instead of facing problems, you end up doing everything to avoid thinking about them, and often this can translate into destructive behaviors like alcohol use, drugs, social media addiction, video game addiction, and so on. Rating 9.1 out of 10. Meditation. Meditation is a practice that helps achieve mental clarity, emotional relaxation, and increased awareness. There are many types of meditation. Here are some of the most famous. Focused breathing. You focus on your breath, and each time thoughts arise, you bring your focus back to your breath. The goal is to feel the air entering and exiting your nostrils. Mindfulness meditation. The goal is to focus on the present moment, including the sensations and thoughts you are experiencing, without judging or trying to change them. Body scan. This involves mentally scanning the parts of your body and focusing on perceiving all the sensations you can feel, whether they are uncomfortable, painful, pleasant, or neutral. Again, the intent is to accept these sensations without trying to change them. Mantra. You use a mantra, a word, or a short phrase repeatedly. This can be done mentally or aloud. Some of the most incredible benefits of meditation, proven through scientific studies, include stress reduction, improved emotional regulation, enhanced concentration and cognitive functions, better sleep quality, improved pain management, boosted immune function, increased willpower, and self-discipline. If you're interested in meditation, click the link in the description for the video covering all the existing meditations. If you don't find it, subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified as soon as it's published. The description also includes at least one scientific study supporting each mentioned benefit. Rating 9.9 out of 10. Sleep routine. The consequences of insufficient sleep can have a significant impact on your physical and mental health. Here are some of these consequences: impaired cognitive function, mood disorders, weakened immune system, increased risk of chronic diseases, weight gain and metabolic issues, decreased libido and sexual dysfunctions, impaired physical performance, increased risk of mental disorders, memory impairment. I've included links to studies supporting each of these consequences in the description. Clearly, sleep is quite important. Here's how to improve it. Don't eat anything at least 3 hours before going to bed. Stop drinking 2 hours before bed to reduce the likelihood of waking up to go to the bathroom. Stop using electronic devices that emit blue light 1 hour before sleeping. Try to go to bed at the same time every day. Ensure your room is completely dark. If not possible, consider using a sleep mask. Keep your room as quiet as possible. Less noise equals better sleep. If this is impossible, try noise-canceling headphones or white noises. Maintain the room temperature between 60 and 66 degrees Fahrenheit, but make sure you are well covered. Consider doing relaxation-oriented meditation exercises before bedtime. Monitor your diet. Exercise in the morning or afternoon. Avoid doing it in the evening, as the increase in adrenaline and other hormones can lead to difficulties falling asleep and reduced sleep quality. Limit caffeine consumption to the morning. In some people, the effects of caffeine can last more than 12 hours. Consult a doctor about the possibility of taking a melatonin supplement. Don't stress too much if you don't always follow your sleep routine perfectly. Excessive worry can lead to insomnia. If you still can't sleep well and sufficiently after following all these tips, consider consulting a doctor or visiting a sleep clinic. Over 60 conditions can affect your sleep quality. Getting good and sufficient sleep is one of the most important things you can do for your health. Rating 9.95 out of 10. Cold exposure. Many often use cold showers or cold plunges to test themselves and improve their discipline. Although there are no studies confirming this thesis, the physical effects are undoubtedly interesting. Here are the main ones: improvement in vascular circulation, reduction of inflammation, increased recovery speed. Rating 6.9 out of 10. Cold approach or highly unlikely requests. Approaching a girl out of the blue and asking for her phone number or asking for a discount when ordering coffee at a bar are situations with a high likelihood of rejection. The idea behind doing this type of activity is to increase courage, especially to increase our tolerance for rejection. In a 2003 study, Eisenberger and colleagues demonstrated that rejection is one of those situations that physiologically activates the same receptors in the brain as when experiencing physical pain. Rejection is literally equivalent to experiencing physical pain. Voluntarily seeking rejection can increase our tolerance to it, so when we eventually face it, it won't be as painful. Rating 7.7 out of 10. Scheduling the day and activities. Planning activities has been shown to significantly help reduce stress, improve time management, decrease procrastination, and thus increase productivity. Rating 8.5 out of 10. Waking up at 5 in the morning. This idea has become famous worldwide thanks to the book The 5 a.m. Club. Waking up at 5 in the morning can be incredibly productive. This is because it's a time when most people are still asleep, and you have the opportunity to work on the most important things without the risk of being interrupted or distracted. Moreover, there seems to be a sort of placebo effect in the idea of being disciplined in waking up early and being productive while others are asleep. That said, people have different sleep cycles, and waking up at such a time might not be ideal for everyone. Additionally, the day remains 24 hours regardless of whether you wake up at 5 or 10 in the morning. Rating 7.3 out of 10. Investing in yourself. I believe investing time and money to improve yourself, learn new things, develop new skills, and have new experiences is one of the most important and rewarding things life has to offer. Rating 10 out of 10. One ruled an empire. The other is considered the greatest swordsman in history. From contrasting sides of the world, and despite a giant leap of time, these two people found harmony in one thing: iron-like self-discipline. Marcus Aurelius was among the most respected emperors in Roman history. Considered the last of the 5 good emperors of Rome, he did everything in his power for his citizens, despite all the challenges he faced, such as the Antonine Plague, Rome's first true pandemic, the Germanic Wars, and the Parthian War. In the history of Stoicism, Marcus Aurelius was also a notable figure. He was an advocate of reason, fate, and self-control. Unfortunately, people don't live forever. But centuries after Marcus Aurelius's death, a Japanese swordsman arose from the east. Miyamoto Musashi was a Ronin from the Edo period. He was a legend, a sage philosopher, and a skilled strategist who became famous through his unique double-bladed swordsmanship and undefeated record in his 61 duels. Just like Marcus, Miyamoto left a mark on history. He wrote 21 principles called Dakodo that have helped millions of people to develop a deep insight towards self-discipline. Self-discipline is the secret ingredient for success in life. The only question is this: how do you achieve this self-discipline? Here are 4 ways of becoming self-disciplined derived from Marcus Aurelius and Miyamoto Musashi's philosophical beliefs. 1. Find a purpose in the sea of pleasures. Among thousands of short-lived pleasures, a long-term goal must exist, one that we live for, one that will make us get out of the comfort of our bed. Marcus Aurelius reminds us of this when he wrote, "At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for, to huddle under the blankets and stay warm?" As Marcus also says, we were never born only to feel nice throughout our lifetime. You cannot lie in bed and spend 2 hours scrolling TikTok or pretending to work or study by watching YouTube videos. I know the warmth of blankets is certainly more appealing than housekeeping, but to feel nice on many occasions is not what we really want. Self-discipline is a way to resist pleasures. Many people today also know it as delayed gratification. For Miyamoto Musashi, postponing desires will lead your life to happiness. The sea of pleasures kills purpose. I'm not saying to aim for no pleasure your entire life. After all, delayed gratification means delayed, not abstinence. 2. Less is more. The desire to want more is inherent in every human being. The desire for novelty is inherent in every human being. The desire in this case, however, can kill all your progress. A good example of this is online businesses. I talk to more and more people who make the same mistake, a mistake I myself have made too many times. You find an interesting business, you want to change your financial situation, and you decide to take the leap. Weeks go by, and the first big obstacles come. The first failures arrive. What do most people do in this situation? They look for another business, a business that is sold as easier, faster, or, in short, better. So they drop everything and jump into this new business, and what happens after a few weeks? The exact same thing that happened with the first business. The first failures and obstacles come, and again they find themselves looking for the next big opportunity, creating a vicious cycle that only leads to continuous failures. Musashi said, "Practice and understand the realization that by knowing one, you know 1,000. Focus on one thing at a time, and keep that damn focus. It takes discipline and courage to stay focused on just one thing. Fear is great when the desired results don't come, but don't fall into the trap. Changing or quitting will make you start from zero again." One of my favorite quotes comes from a great fighter, Bruce Lee. "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." 3. Pain is fine. Once you've finally chosen a path to explore, the next step is to stay on it. Miyamoto Musashi emphasizes never stray from the way, and Marcus Aurelius supports this by saying, one must do what one needs to do. What do they mean? Regardless of what happens along the way, you have to keep doing what needs to be done. This advice is useless when things are going well. We all manage to be disciplined when everything is easy. The real difficulty and discipline are only seen when things go wrong, when the pain comes, the physical pain, but also and especially the emotional pain. How do you overcome pain? Step 1. Accept the pain. Pain, like pleasure, is neither good nor bad. However, it becomes intolerable when it is not accepted. It becomes intolerable when you have the belief that pain should not be there. Accepting pain will not make it disappear, but accepting it will eliminate all the pain our minds create. The pain caused by the normality of life is manageable, but if we add the pain created by ourselves due to non-acceptance, that becomes unbearable. Step 2. Remember that it is temporary. Just as pleasure, pain comes and then goes away. Just as it comes, sooner or later, it goes away. Actually, everything is transitory. Our emotions are temporary. Life is temporary. Thinking that the pain you feel in difficult times will last forever becomes inconceivable to accept, but when you remind yourself that sooner or later it will go away, it makes it much more manageable. Step 3. Remind yourself that you are strong. If you think of you from the past, I am sure you have been through horrible times, sad times, and times filled with pain. As I am sure of this, I am also sure that there were times you resisted and times you made it through. Remember that you have the ability to do it, because you have done it plenty of times before. 4. Uphold honor and consistency at all times. For Marcus and Musashi, consistency is vital. It's an ingredient of self-discipline and a recipe for success. We cannot control the outcome, but we can control our actions, commitment, and dedication. The initial goal is always to achieve the desired result, make more money, develop deep relationships, or lose weight. It is important to have a crystal clear goal, but as soon as the goal has been defined, the focus must change. The focus no longer has to be making more money, but getting up every day and working on your business for 3 hours without interruption, whether you are motivated or not, whether you feel like it or not. The only thing that matters at the end of the month is how many hours you spend doing the things that need to be done. The only way to achieve these hours is with consistency. Musashi said, "You may abandon your own body, but you must preserve your honor. Honor is preserved by keeping your word. The most important given word is the one you give to yourself." Platonism. The meaning of life is to reach the highest form of knowledge, to learn as much as possible. Aristotelianism. Aristotle, a student of Plato, believed that the meaning of life was to be good. However, to be good, it was not enough to study and increase knowledge about being good. One had to actively engage in good actions that could make a tangible difference. Socrates. According to Socrates, the purpose of life is to live guided by reason, virtue, and moral principles. For him, virtue is knowledge. Cynicism. Antisthenes, a disciple of Socrates, first outlined this philosophy. In cynicism, there is a rejection of desires such as wealth, power, health, and fame. These are not valid purposes of life. What is valid is self-sufficiency and mastery over one's mental attitude. The fundamental goal is to live in accordance with nature. Cyrenaicism. Immediate gratification is the purpose of life. Denying one's immediate desires or needs only leads to unhappiness. Hedonism. The sole meaning of life is to perform actions that bring pleasure, to seek personal pleasure in every way and form. Existential nihilism. Life has no intrinsic meaning. Life has no purpose, no morality, and there are no absolute truths or values. Theism. The meaning of life is to follow and pursue the will of God or the gods. Stoicism. The meaning of life lies in freedom from suffering through equanimity. Equanimity is the state in which we develop self-control and mental strength to manage and overcome destructive emotions. The goal is to develop logic, calmness, reflective ability, and detachment from our emotions and worldly things. Epicureanism. The meaning of life lies in the pursuit of modest pleasures, not through carnal pleasures, alcohol, or the pleasure of food. Modest pleasures are, for example, the pleasure derived from freedom of fear, tranquility, and the absence of disturbance in the soul. Utilitarianism. The meaning of life lies in maximizing happiness and minimizing suffering for the greatest number of people. Actions are morally right if they produce the greatest overall happiness. Postmodernism. In the postmodern view, life has no universal meaning. Meaning is subjective and a social construct defined by cultural and personal factors. Thus, meaning depends largely on the surrounding environment in which we live. Existentialism. This view of life's meaning is related to postmodernism. In fact, the meaning of life is subjective, and there is no universal code or moral authority. The main difference from postmodernism is that in existentialism, individuals create their own meaning, which is not dependent on the culture or social construct in which they live. Naturalistic pantheism. The meaning of life lies in caring for nature and the environment. Biological view. In the biological view, the purpose of life is survival and transmission of genes. Pragmatism. The meaning of life in pragmatism is found in the continuous process of navigating and improving one's experiences through practical and constructive actions. The emphasis is on experimentation, adaptability, and practical problem-solving to improve the quality of life for oneself and others. Hinduism. The meaning of life is to fulfill one's dharma. Dharma is the individual's duty to follow moral principles and an upright life. Fulfilling one's dharma means achieving spiritual growth that leads to attaining moksha, which is the liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Karma is a fundamental element. The actions we take in this life have significant repercussions in our future lives, so we must act accordingly. Buddhism. In Buddhism, the meaning of life is to overcome suffering and achieve nirvana. To reach nirvana, one must follow the path indicated by Buddha: wisdom, meditation, moral conduct, and compassion. Nirvana means freedom from both suffering and rebirth. Taoism. The meaning of life is to return to the primordial and reunite with the unity of the universe. To achieve this, the key lies within each human being, and that key is introspection. Enlightenment philosophy. The purpose of life lies in human progress, reason, and individualism. It is necessary to defend individual rights and autonomy. Personal fulfillment ultimately aims at creating a just society. Friedrich Nietzsche. The meaning of life is to live authentically and powerfully, creating one's own goals and values. Sigmund Freud. He believes that the purpose of human life is to find ways to reduce the amount of information we have to process to make sense of our world. Arthur Schopenhauer. One's life is a purposeless, irrational, and painful impulse. Salvation, liberation, and escape from suffering are found in aesthetic contemplation, sympathy for others, and the pursuit of perfection. Carl Jung. The meaning of life is tied to self-discovery and self-realization, accepting and becoming who one really is. The sole purpose of existence is to kindle a light in the darkness of mere being. Marcus Aurelius. The meaning of life is to develop a good character and act for the common good. Classical liberalism. The meaning of life is to achieve and maintain individual freedom. Kantianism. The meaning of life is to contribute to the progress of human liberation through the promotion of culture, civilization, and moral community. Ikigai. In Japanese culture, the term ikigai means a reason for being, and to find your ikigai, you must find the intersection of 4 elements: what you love to do, what you are good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. If you can find a job or an activity that covers these 4 areas, you have found your ikigai, your reason for being. Alfred Adler. According to Adler, the purpose of life is to find a balance between personal self-realization and the need to be useful to others. Oscar Wilde. According to Wilde, the purpose of life is self-development. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. According to American psychologist Abraham Maslow, the purpose of life is to satisfy one's needs in order, starting from physiological needs like hunger, thirst, and sleep, followed by the need for safety, love, and belongingness needs, the need for self-esteem, and finally the need for self-actualization. Viktor Frankl. According to the Austrian psychiatrist and philosopher who spent 3 years in the Nazi concentration camp Auschwitz, the purpose of life consists precisely in finding a purpose. There can be endless purposes in life, but the most important thing is to find one's own. This is a spiritual need, and Frankl clashed with Maslow's philosophy, believing that in many cases the need to find meaning was much more important than other needs, such as safety or physiological ones. Lev Tolstoy. Russian writer and philosopher believed that the only meaning of life was to serve humanity. Absurdism. In absurdism, there is a fundamental contrast between the individual's search for the meaning of life and the apparent lack of meaning in the universe. There are only 3 ways to resolve this contrast. 1. Suicide. 2. Embrace a religious belief. 3. Accept the absurd. Accept that there will always be this fundamental contrast. Moism. The meaning of life is universal and impartial love. To achieve this goal, every person must equally care for all other individuals unconditionally and indiscriminately. This means making no distinctions or having preferences, for example, for friends or family. Confucianism. The meaning of life is to live an ordinary life. Jainism. The meaning of life lies in achieving enlightenment and self-realization through self-discipline and non-violence, known as ahimsa. Legalism. In legalism, trying to find the purpose of life is a meaningless effort. The only thing that matters is seeking practical knowledge, especially that knowledge related to the functions of the state. Flat Earth theory. The meaning of life for flat earthers is... Please help me understand it by writing in the comments. Schizoid personality disorder. The person who suffers from this disorder is very solitary. They are detached from the real world and at the same time take refuge in their inner world, which is often quite imaginative. They have no desire for a partner, no desire for friends, or to maintain contact with family. They don't even have sexual desires. They are emotionally detached and indifferent to social norms, criticism, and praise. Many might describe them as insensitive. They experience very little pleasure or sometimes no pleasure at all from the activities they engage in. Famous people who some have speculated suffered from this disorder are Jean Joubert, a famous serial killer, Albert Einstein, and Vincent van Gogh. Schizotypal personality disorder. Those who suffer from this disorder can be summarized by the words of strange and bizarre. Their behavior, way of dressing, communication, and beliefs are odd and unusual. In short, they do not follow any social norms. They sometimes believe in things like magic and think that their thoughts and words somehow have the power to influence the physical world. They are afraid of social interactions and, as in schizoid disorder, perceive people as malicious. As a result, they do not develop close friendships and experience social anxiety due to paranoid fears. They attribute questionable meanings to events happening in the world. For example, if a dog barks on the street, they may interpret it as a sign that many terrible things will happen that day. It has also been observed that individuals who suffer from this disorder have a higher chance of developing schizophrenia in the future. Famous people believed to have suffered from this disorder include Kim Jong-il, former supreme leader of North Korea, and yes, our dear friend Willy Wonka. Antisocial personality disorder. The person who suffers from this disorder does not respect or follow social norms. They lie and have excellent manipulative skills, with the goal of gaining personal advantages, even at the expense of others. They are irresponsible and impulsive, so it's not uncommon for them to develop violent and aggressive behaviors. They have a high predisposition to substance abuse and alcohol. If they manage to establish a relationship with someone, it usually lasts very little, partly because they completely disregard others' safety and feel no remorse. Many individuals with this disorder have multiple criminal records since they often tend to break the law. However, there are cases where these people achieve great financial success and are quite intelligent and charming. That said, if they manage to reach these milestones, they have no scruples about using illegal and unethical methods. This disorder develops more frequently in men, and some famous people who are believed to have suffered from it include serial killers such as Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, John Cooper, Stephen Timothy Judy, and the scammer Bernie Madoff. Borderline personality disorder. In this disorder, the person suffers from significant emotional instability. They experience strong mood swings and intense emotions of anger, fear of abandonment, and a sense of inner emptiness. Interpersonal relationships are greatly affected. In fact, they are unstable. There are many arguments and breakups in these relationships because the person initially judges others in an idealized way and then strongly devalues them. This disorder is characterized by excessive impulsivity, leading to destructive behaviors such as self-harm and suicidal actions. Those who suffer from it use these destructive behaviors as blackmail to keep from being abandoned. Self-image is compromised and distorted, and again there is a propensity to abuse drugs, alcohol, and sexual promiscuity. Famous people who some speculate have suffered from this disorder are Britney Spears, Amber Heard, and Pete Davidson. Pete Davidson, to date, is the only one who has publicly confirmed that he has this disorder. Histrionic personality disorder. Those with this disorder are constantly trying to be the center of attention. The goal is to attract attention by any means, one of which is by taking great care of their physical appearance. Another way is by being very sexually provocative, trying to be seductive. The individual has exaggerated emotional reactions, especially when receiving criticism and rejection. It's common that once they find a partner, they are initially very emotionally involved. However, the relationship remains systematically superficial and insincere. Why is that? Because those who suffer from this disorder are playing a part. Etymologically, histrionic derives from the Latin histrionix, which means theatrical. Going too deep into a relationship would mean showing the actor's true face, therefore the relationship must remain superficial. Famous people who some speculate have shown behaviors associated with histrionic personality disorder are Kim Kardashian, Kanye West, and Miley Cyrus. Narcissistic personality disorder. This disorder is characterized by a sense of grandiosity, an exaggerated sense of one's own worth. The person feels superior to others, special and better than others. However, they have a constant and excessive need for admiration to maintain this distorted self-identity. If they are superior, it is therefore right to use other people and manipulate them for one's own personal benefit. There is thus a complete lack of empathy. Another characteristic is to be very sensitive to anything that might undermine this figure they have created. If they fail at something, are criticized, offended, or ridiculed, they might have a very violent and angry reaction. From an outsider's perspective, when someone meets a person with this disorder, they might describe them with adjectives like egocentric, arrogant, insensitive, manipulative, and controlling. Famous people whom some speculate may have suffered from this disorder are Donald Trump, Adolf Hitler, and Napoleon Bonaparte. Avoidant personality disorder. The person who suffers from this disorder tries to avoid situations where they might be criticized or new and risky situations. This makes them someone who isolates themselves and avoids romantic and work relationships. If they decide to start a relationship, they have a strong need to be sure they are liked by the other person. They suffer from a deep sense of inferiority and have difficulty with intimacy. Unlike schizoid disorder, in this case, the isolation the individual experiences is very painful. They would like to have intimate connections, but the fear of rejection is too intense. This disorder is more common in women than in men. Famous people who are speculated to have suffered from this disorder are Michael Jackson and two cartoon icons, Charlie Brown and Elsa from Frozen. Dependent personality disorder. The person who suffers from this disorder has low self-esteem. Despite being adults, they depend on others to get by and have an excessive need for others to take care of them. This disorder is characterized by difficulty making decisions, even everyday ones such as what to eat for breakfast, what clothes to choose, or how to style their hair. Those with DPD avoid expressing their emotions and try to avoid any kind of disagreement. Disagreement is so feared because there is a risk that it will lead to a relationship breakup. This breakup would mean being abandoned, and for someone with this disorder who depends on others, it would mean not surviving. People with DPD have a persistent element of submission, and they also have a higher risk of experiencing or having experienced abusive relationships. It is a disorder that is more common in women. Fictional characters exhibiting many of these behaviors are Bella Swan from Twilight and Peter Pettigrew from Harry Potter. Obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. This disorder is characterized by an obsession with rules, details, order, organization, lists, or patterns. Those who suffer from it are usually extremely devoted to productivity and work. There is a very high tendency towards perfectionism. This leads the individual to be unable to complete many tasks because they are not perfect. On one hand, they are very responsible and methodical in their work, but they greatly lack flexibility and can be stubborn. They are hypercritical of everyone, including themselves. The anxiety caused by the lack of control is quite constant throughout the day. They feel the need to always do things absolutely right, and actions that do not fit into this category are considered absolutely wrong. There is no middle ground. It is estimated that between 2 and 7% of the world's population suffers from this disorder, making it the most widespread personality disorder overall. It is also one of the least compromising disorders. In fact, individuals can achieve great success in certain areas of their lives. Famous people who are speculated to have suffered from this disorder are Steve Jobs and Estee Lauder. Paranoid personality disorder. This disorder is characterized by suspicious tendencies and distrust towards everyone, including friends, relatives, strangers, and partners. The individual is afraid that people will betray or somehow try to harm them. There is a constant search for clues that support this type of thinking. They hold a lot of resentment and interpret people's actions and intentions negatively. It is challenging to be able to maintain lasting relationships, and if they find themselves in a love relationship, they constantly suspect that their partner is cheating or wants to cheat on them. Often, to defend themselves from everyone they believe is plotting something against them, they implement reprisals and legal actions. Famous people believed to have suffered from this disorder are Hitler and Saddam Hussein. Although centuries have passed, sword saint Miyamoto Musashi remains in history. With an unparalleled dueling record of 61-0 in one-on-one duels, he is a swordsman unlike any other. During his time, he traveled across Japan, defeating every opponent with his dual-wielding style. Children grow through their experiences. For Miyamoto, the battlefield and clan conflicts were his mentors. While a typical child would attend school at 13, the Sword Saint had already made his first kill by then. Unrivaled. That is what best describes him. He lived a life as a vagabond, a life of solitude. Solitude can be hard. Really hard, and nowadays, it's probably even harder. We do everything to avoid being alone, and to avoid feeling what's inside of us. We do everything to avoid feeling loneliness, because for many, loneliness is the worst thing one can feel. Musashi spent almost his entire life as a vagabond, a life full of solitude. Shortly before his death, he wrote Dakoto, The Way to Go Forth Alone. Musashi managed to live a life that we all seek, a life full of meaning and fulfillment, despite the loneliness. These are all the Dakoto principles that will help you walk the path of solitude. 1. Accept everything just the way it is. Do you ever get angry? You can get angry because someone betrayed you, maybe because your favorite team didn't win the game, or because your wallet was stolen. Anger in this context is caused by our unrealistic expectations. You created the expectation that you couldn't be betrayed, that you couldn't lose your wallet, and that your team should have won. All of these are unrealistic expectations because none of what you expected happened. Accepting everything just the way it is means taking the next step and understanding that what happened cannot be changed. If what happened cannot be changed, then by accepting the situation, the pain that comes from anger, frustration, and a sense of injustice disappears. 2. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Instead of focusing only on what makes us feel good at the moment, we should seek a deeper meaning. Not seeking pleasure for its own sake means looking beyond immediate gratifications and thinking about the consequences of our actions. I am sure you have already experienced things in your life that bring immediate pleasure, but in the long run, create much more harm than good. Going out every night and getting drunk may make you forget your problems for a few hours, but the next day, the problems are still there. Not to mention all the damage caused directly by alcohol, like saying a word too many to a friend or behaving irresponsibly while driving. 3. Do not, under any circumstances, depend on a partial feeling. All emotions have one common characteristic. They are temporary. They do not last forever. Would you ever kill someone because they made you angry? Maybe they insulted your mother in front of everyone. The reasonable and rational answer is no. But now the question arises, are there people who do this? People who let anger control their actions? The answer is obviously yes. Where are these people? Still in prison. Some are in physical prison, but all are in emotional prison. Emotions should be tools that we use, not tools that use us. 4. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. You are what you are, nothing more and nothing less. You are a mortal being who makes mistakes, who is light years away from being perfect. You are not your achievements, and you are not your possessions. You are simply a human being, worth neither more nor less than any other human being. While some may find these words demotivating, others will perceive them as a bolt from the blue that shatters their chains. Nowadays, appearance and reputation are very important, and often people find themselves acting in their lives rather than living them. They try to maintain a false image of themselves, feeling deep down like imposters. But if you take yourself lightly and remember that you are merely a human being, you will no longer have to act a part. You can finally be yourself. However, remember that when it comes to understanding the world around you, do not be superficial. Strive to fully understand the mechanisms and dynamics of the world you live in. Take yourself lightly, but view the world deeply. 5. Be detached from desire lifelong. Desire is the recipe for creating emotional pain. We desire something when we want something we don't yet possess, and we usually believe that once we obtain our desire, we will be happy. But what happens every time we fulfill a desire? Nothing different. The happiness lasts for a few moments and is soon replaced by the next desire. Detaching from desire doesn't necessarily mean having no ambitions. It means detaching from the outcome, which we often do not have complete control over. Do you manage to get what you desire? Fantastic. Don't manage to get it? Equally fantastic. 6. Do not regret what you have done. Regret lies in the past. Unfortunately, we cannot go back in time and change our actions, especially those we consider mistakes. Living in regret means living in a world that no longer exists, living and suffering today for something you did yesterday. Regret exists only in a world where you have the power to experience one thing alone: suffering. The present, on the other hand, is the only moment in which you have the power to do something concrete, such as make up for your mistakes. 7. Never be jealous. Jealousy is an emotion that everyone has experienced at least once in their life, but it is an emotion we cannot communicate. Why is it almost impossible to hear someone say, "I am jealous"? Because it means admitting to the world that we are inferior. However, this sense of inferiority is always unrealistic. In this context, we use the word jealousy as a synonym for envy. To be envious of someone, we must necessarily compare ourselves to that person and conclude that they have something we do not have or are something we want to be. If you find yourself in these dynamics, remember principle number 4: think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. You are a mortal being who makes mistakes, and just as you are, so are all the people you envy. The only difference between you and them is that you know both the good and the bad of your life, but you only see or focus on the good in theirs. 8. Never let yourself be saddened by a separation. Separation is part of life. You can only feel pain from separation if your expectations are unrealistic. You can feel pain from separation only if you have not accepted that life is change. Sooner or later, you will separate from everything and everyone, more or less quickly. Accepting this means being able to appreciate both the moments spent together and the moment of separation. 9. Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others. A quote that struck me deeply by Nelson Mandela is the following: "Hate is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." Hate and resentment are the same thing. The only difference lies in intensity. Hate has a higher intensity than resentment. So Mandela's quote about resentment could be, "Resentment is a slightly less potent poison that we decide to drink, hoping our enemy will die." Regarding complaints, I have slightly modified a famous quote by Irma Bombeck. Complaints are like a rocking chair. They give you something to do, but they don't get you anywhere. 10. Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. Love is a fantastic feeling. However, it becomes a problem when it blinds us to when it is the only thing we use to move forward in our lives. How many stories have we heard of relationships where there is domestic violence, and despite this violence, love blinded the victims? Many people remain trapped in a cycle of abuse because their love for their partner clouds their judgment. In these cases, love transforms into a force that justifies violent behavior, preventing the victim from seeing the situation for what it truly is. Emotions are relevant and important, but it is crucial that they do not take over our lives. 11. In all things have no preferences. The risk of having preferences is that they reduce the freedom to experience new things. The more preferences you have, the less flexible you will be in your decisions. On the contrary, having fewer preferences will increase the options you can choose from. Imagine yourself as a warrior in the period when Musashi lived. Having preferences in the manner and style of combat could be fatal. It could be fatal because if your opponent understood your combat preferences, they could begin to predict your moves, leading to your death. 12. Be indifferent to where you live. This principle teaches us not to become too attached to a specific place. We should be able to adapt to any environment and find serenity regardless of where we are. Being indifferent to where you live doesn't mean not appreciating your surroundings, but rather letting the environment determine your state of mind. Developing the ability to adapt to different environments makes you more resilient and flexible. Living with this mindset helps you better manage changes and enjoy every experience life offers, no matter the place. 13. Do not pursue the taste of good food. This advice is more useful than ever in this modern era. Today, more people die from overeating than from starvation, a dynamic completely opposite to previous millennia. It has been shown that the more food tastes good, the more we tend to eat. Nowadays, food companies know how to masterfully dose sugars and fats to get people addicted. Chasing the taste of food means losing control over ourselves. 14. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. Keep only possessions that are useful to you, which means letting go of everything you no longer use or need. Having more things means having more complexity in your life. Fewer things equals less complexity. Life itself can be incredibly complex, so try to be the one who doesn't make it overly complicated. Not holding on to possessions you no longer need means freeing up physical and mental space. By letting go of superfluous items, we open ourselves up to new opportunities and experiences, reducing stress and confusion. Be willing to make room for what is truly important and meaningful in your life. 15. Do not act following customary beliefs. This principle invites us not to conform to society's beliefs and habits without careful consideration. It means being critical of traditions and conventions, making choices based on our personal understanding and evaluation. U.S. Navy Admiral Grace Hopper sums up this principle excellently. The most dangerous phrase is, "We've always done it this way." 16. Do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful. A functional life and decisions oriented toward what is truly useful are recurring themes in Musashi's writings. Once again, he emphasizes that balance is essential. Weapons have a precise purpose, just like food and sleep. Too much of each can only lead to harmful imbalances, weakening, and inefficiency. Weapons are no exception. Keep in mind that during Miyamoto's time, weapons were essential for personal defense and protection, and were used in many cases daily. However, excessive reliance on weapons can turn into a weakness, making the individual vulnerable to their own insecurity. 17. Do not fear death. There are two types of people: those who die but have never accepted their mortality, and those who die having accepted their mortality. Fear of dying can sometimes help us survive longer, but it can prevent us from living fully. Imagine an elderly person facing a terminal illness. If this person is obsessed with the fear of death, they might spend their days brooding over the inevitability of their fate, thus losing the opportunity to enjoy precious moments with loved ones. Conversely, if they accept their condition and face death with serenity, they can focus on what truly matters, spending their time in a meaningful and gratifying way. 18. Do not seek to possess either goods or fiefs for your old age. This principle urges us to avoid being too attached to material goods and social status. In the final phase of your life, dedicating time and energy to increasing your wealth is very sad. As you approach the end, the truly relevant things gain more weight, while the less relevant things lose their significance. Money is necessary for living, but at a certain point, more money does not equate to more joy. The less time you have to live, the more you want to use that time meaningfully. For Musashi, using this time to increase wealth is not the right choice. 19. Respect Buddha and the gods without counting on their help. Despite the profound respect Musashi had for Buddha and the gods, it was crucial for him that responsibility and his destiny were in his hands and no one else's, including the gods. Even though we may find comfort and inspiration in our faith, ultimately it is up to us to face life's challenges with courage and determination. 20. You may abandon your own body, but you must preserve your honor. Preserving one's honor means maintaining dignity and moral integrity even in the most difficult situations. While we may be forced to sacrifice our physical well-being, our honor remains intact, allowing us to leave a legacy of courage and integrity for future generations. Never set aside your honor for fear of losing your life. Losing honor is far worse than losing your life. This concept was deeply rooted in the culture and philosophy of Japanese warriors of the time, influencing their actions and decisions in every situation. 21. Never stray from the way. Never stray from the way means remaining faithful to our principles, goals, and values, regardless of the difficulties or temptations we encounter. This constant and disciplined commitment helps us realize our full potential and live a life that is meaningful and consistent with our ideals. Special theory of relativity. At 26 years old, Einstein proposed that the laws of physics are the same for all non-accelerating observers and that the speed of light in a vacuum is constant, regardless of the observer's motion. For instance, imagine you're on a train moving at a constant speed and you shine a flashlight forward. According to Einstein's theory, if someone standing still outside the train were to measure the speed of the light beam from the flashlight, they would find it to be the same as if the train were stationary. This theory revolutionized our understanding of space, energy, and time. Photoelectric effect. In 1905, Einstein extended Planck's hypothesis to explain the photoelectric effect. This effect explains how light can eject electrons from a material's surface. Contrary to classical physics, which predicted light energy to be continuous, Einstein proposed that light comes in discrete packets called photons. This proposal is also known as the quantum theory of light. When light shines on a material, photons transfer their energy to electrons, allowing them to escape. This discovery laid the groundwork for quantum mechanics and earned Einstein the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. Wave-particle duality. Light behaves both as a wave and as particles called photons. It introduced the idea that particles, such as electrons, manifest wave-like properties and that the behavior of matter at the atomic scale is fundamentally different from classical physics. Mass-energy equivalence. This equation is considered by many the most important physics equation in history. E equals mc squared demonstrates the equivalence of mass and energy, implying that mass can be converted into energy and vice versa, proving that they are basically different forms of the same thing. E equals mc squared is so powerful because it laid the groundwork for the development of nuclear energy. Inertia of energy. Inertia is the property of matter that resists changes in motion. This principle, as described by Newton's laws of motion, explains how objects maintain their state of rest or uniform motion unless acted upon by external forces. When considering mass-energy equivalence, we understand that mass and energy are interchangeable. Therefore, just as mass exhibits inertia, energy also resists changes in its state. This concept implies that energy, which is inherently linked to mass, contributes to the gravitational attraction of objects, as described by the theory of general relativity. General theory of relativity. When Einstein proposed his special theory of relativity, he did not consider gravity. Adding what is known as Einstein's field equations, he created the general theory of relativity, redefining gravity as the curvature of space-time caused by mass and energy. It explains how objects with mass warp the fabric of space-time, influencing the motion of other objects. This theory offers new insights into phenomena like the bending of light around celestial bodies and the dynamics of the universe on a large scale. Gravitational waves. As a consequence of his general theory of relativity, Einstein predicted the existence of gravitational waves in spacetime caused by the acceleration of massive objects. These waves were directly detected for the first time in 2015. The most incredible aspect of this discovery is that the idea of gravitational waves was theorized in 1916, 99 years before it could be physically detected. Cosmological constant. Einstein, in order to make the equation of general relativity work, had to add a constant. The function of this constant was to stabilize the universe and make it a static universe. This constant, known today as the cosmological constant, was called by himself his biggest blunder. Why? Edwin Hubble, years after Einstein's theorizing, proved that the universe is expanding. So, Einstein removed this constant, calling it precisely his biggest blunder. Decades later, it was discovered that there is a force in the universe that acts against the force of gravity and causes the expansion of the universe to accelerate. To take this force into account, there was the need to add back into the equation what Einstein believed was his biggest blunder. Equivalence principle. The equivalence principle serves as a foundational concept for understanding gravity in general relativity. It states that the effects of gravity are locally indistinguishable from the effects of acceleration. Imagine this situation. There are two identical rockets. The characteristic of these two rockets is that they do not have any windows, and no noise or vibration can be heard inside. So you cannot hear whether the rocket is ignited or not. One rocket is on the Earth, completely stationary. The other rocket is in space with a constant acceleration equivalent to the gravitational acceleration present on Earth. The equivalence principle explains how in this scenario it is impossible to tell the difference between the force of gravity and the acceleration of the rocket. So if I teleported you into either rocket suddenly, you would not be able to tell in any way whether you were in the stationary rocket on Earth or the rocket in space. If you tried to drop an apple on the ground, the apple would fall at the same speed in both rockets. EPR paradox. In collaboration with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, Einstein formulated the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox in 1935. The paradox revolves around the concept of quantum entanglement, where two or more particles become correlated in such a way that the state of one particle instantly influences the state of another, regardless of the distance between them. This idea appeared to contradict Einstein's theory of relativity, which says nothing can move faster than light. This paradox made a lot of people question if quantum mechanics was missing something important. Unified field theory. Einstein spent much of his later career searching for a unified theory that would include all fundamental forces of nature, along with gravity and electromagnetism. While he never fully realized this goal, his attempt paved the way for later advancements in theoretical physics, such as string theory and quantum gravity. Bose-Einstein statistics. In collaboration with the Indian physicist Satyendra Nath Bose, Einstein developed Bose-Einstein statistics. These rules explain how identical particles, such as photons or subatomic particles, act in quantum physics. Unlike regular particles, they can be in the same place at the same time. These statistics were important for understanding how particles behave in cold temperatures and dense environments, which has helped us in fields like quantum optics and the study of condensed matter. Theory of critical opalescence. Critical opalescence theory explains why substances appear cloudy near certain temperature and pressure conditions, known as critical points. These critical points mark when substances change from one phase to another, like from liquid to gas. Opalescence refers to the increased scattering of light in these conditions. Quantum theory of solids. Einstein helped us understand how atoms behave in solids, especially how heat affects them. In 1907, he suggested a model where atoms in a solid act like tiny swinging pendulums. This model explained how solids heat up differently at low temperatures compared to what was expected before. Einstein also showed that vibrations in the solid structure act like tiny bundles of energy, kind of like how light behaves as photons. This idea helped us grasp how heat moves through solids. Brownian motion. Einstein used the Brownian motion, proving mathematically for the first time ever the existence of atoms. But not only that, he also managed to figure out how to calculate the size of atoms based on how much the Brownian particles moved. Einstein refrigerator. In 1926, Einstein and his former student Leo Szilard patented the Einstein refrigerator, which operates on the principle of absorption refrigeration. It was designed to be safer and more efficient than conventional refrigerators of the time, using a closed-cycle absorption system that required no moving parts and thus had minimal risk of leaks or mechanical failure. All or nothing thinking. This first cognitive distortion is closely related to perfectionism and unrealistic expectations. Have you ever found yourself saying things like, "I am a complete idiot. I am not funny at all"? Imagine you are a student who always gets an A+ in every subject, but one day you get a D. If after receiving a D you have thoughts like, "I am a failure," then you are using all or nothing thinking. If I can't do this perfectly, then it's not worth doing at all. If you eat a cookie while on a diet, you think you've completely ruined all your progress, so you might as well binge on sweets. You will never be perfect, nor always excellent in what you do. There are no parents who are always exceptional, no entrepreneurs who always make the right decision, and no flawless players. Perfection doesn't exist, and the opposite is true. It's practically impossible for you to be terrible at everything you do. It's a matter of absolutes, and absolutes in the reality of human existence tend to not exist. If you fall victim to this cognitive distortion, you continuously discredit yourself without compassion because you never meet your absolutely unrealistic expectations. From your point of view, the world is either black or white. There are no shades of gray. Selective abstraction. In this cognitive distortion, you focus only on one or a few details of a situation, ignoring all others. Imagine making a mistake on an assignment and getting an A-. Instead of weighing the situation for what it is, which is that you got 9 out of 10 answers correct, your focus is entirely on the single mistake you made. That one mistake becomes the only relevant thing. The situation is no longer, "I got an A-", but "how could I have made such a mistake?" An even more fitting example today is the world of social media. You post a video, a photo, or a comment and receive dozens of positive feedback, except for 2. However, those 2 negative feedbacks are not weighed and considered for what they are. Instead, they become a psychological burden that disproportionately affects you. Selective abstraction, however, is not necessarily focused on the negative. It can also be focused on the positive. Imagine receiving feedback on a project at work. Among the various comments, some specifically praise your collaboration skills and creativity in problem solving. If you suffer from selective abstraction, you might focus only on the positive feedback, ignoring the constructive criticisms or suggestions for improvement in other areas. Magnification of the negative. In this cognitive distortion, normal negative events are magnified, making them seem more significant and severe than they really are. We can define it as a form of selective abstraction, focused solely on the negative, on steroids. Do you make a small mistake during a presentation? You think, "I've ruined the entire presentation." Do you get a lower grade than usual on an exam? You think, "This grade is terrible and a disaster for my GPA." Do you get a speeding ticket? You think, "This ticket is a huge problem. I feel like I've ruined my entire budget for this month. I don't know how I'll manage this unexpected expense." The negative event should not be ignored, but it should be weighed for what it truly is. Magnifying the negative can lead to experiencing disproportionate anxiety and stress. overgeneralization. Imagine you are a woman, and while at a bar, you witness a very strong scene. A guy approaches your friend and slaps her on the backside. As you leave the bar, you say, "Men are all the same. Stupid pigs." This single negative episode has led you to draw a conclusion about an entire category. Clearly, not all men are the same, and not all behave this way. This cognitive distortion leads to drawing conclusions, thus generalizing events, situations, or people erroneously. Let's look at another example. Imagine you have an employee who arrives late, and this happens periodically at least once a week. On Monday, you arrive at work on time, and this employee is 20 minutes late. You talk to their manager and say, "This guy is always late. It's unacceptable." Once again, you have overgeneralized the situation. Saying he arrives late at least once a week represents reality. Saying or thinking he's always late does not reflect reality. The most common words used by those who overgeneralize are never, always, every time, everyone, and nobody. Labeling. This cognitive distortion involves incorrectly labeling yourself or someone else based on their actions. It is an irrational distortion that leads to highly counterproductive consequences. The problem with labeling is that it makes change very difficult. This is because changing behaviors is easy. Changing someone's identity is much harder. I am not a healthy person. This belief can make change nearly impossible because you are not describing unhealthy behaviors, but who you are as a person. If you are made this way, then there is nothing you can do about it. Labeling also becomes problematic when applied to others. When this happens, we can only see people in a continually distorted way. If I label my brother as an idiot, I will tend to treat him as such. If I label my boss as a jerk, consciously or unconsciously, my attitude toward him will be influenced by this label. Whatever someone labeled as a jerk does will be seen as a jerk move. Take the example of the jerk boss again. One day you talk to him and tell him it's a very tiring period for you, and the next day he brings you a coffee. You might interpret this gesture as a mockery, thinking, "This guy is making fun of me after I opened up to him, rubbing my fatigue in my face." Without labeling, you might interpret the gesture differently, thinking, "It was very thoughtful of him to bring me a coffee the day after I shared my struggles with him." Same behavior, different interpretation. Minimizing or disqualifying the positive. Imagine the following situation. For 14 months, you've been following a terrible diet full of junk food. You decide to change your situation by starting a more balanced diet, consulting a nutritionist, and then going grocery shopping, buying all the ingredients to follow this new diet. The next day, you cook and eat exactly what you had planned. A friend who knows your situation says, "That's fantastic. You've started the diet, and the first day went great. Good job." Your immediate response is, "It's just one day of eating healthy, it's nothing special." What you've just done is minimize the positive. You've discredited the fact that it's the first day you're tracking calories and following a healthy diet after 14 months, a huge step. You're also aware that the first step toward change is the hardest. You know this because it took you 14 months to take this first step, yet you consider it insignificant. This cognitive distortion leads you to situations where you do something good, positive, or well done, but you always disqualify it. You disqualify it by thinking it's due to luck, or by minimizing the impact of that positive action you performed. If someone compliments you, you dismiss it by immediately thinking of all your negative points. If someone you don't know at a party compliments you on your gentle manners, you think, they're just saying that out of politeness, or they don't know me in all the situations in my life where I'm not so kind. Ever heard the term "can't catch a break"? People who tend to use this cognitive distortion can't ever give themselves the chance to catch a break. Fortune telling. Have you ever heard of those who claim to predict the future? Those who read your palm or cards, those who do numerology or even astrology? We can categorize all these people as fortune tellers. I hope not to ruin your deeply held beliefs, but there are no methods for predicting the future. When you find yourself falling into this cognitive distortion, the fortune teller predicting the future is you. This distortion is characterized by a sense of certainty about what will happen in the future. There is often a tendency to have pessimistic expectations of certainty. Are you about to take blood tests? You are 100% certain that your cholesterol will be high. Or perhaps you are sure that you will fail the next test, or that you won't get that job. The pessimistic view of the future is the most common, but the optimistic view also exists. I am 100% sure I will arrive on time for the appointment. Even in this case, you cannot be certain of the outcome, and when your expectations are not met, the disappointment you will feel will be very high. In both cases, the key is that the person believes they can predict the future with a certainty that is not justified by facts. Catastrophizing. Have you just discovered a new spot on your skin and you think, "This is cancer. I knew it. My life is over. Who knows how many days I have left to live?" In this cognitive distortion, we focus on the worst possible outcome, even if it is unlikely. If you are waiting for a friend to arrive at your house and they are 15 minutes late, you think, "They must have had a car accident," when maybe they are just late because they miscalculated the time and there's traffic. You are afraid to fly because you think the plane will crash and you will die. Since catastrophizing can often be confused with fortune-telling and magnification of the negative, here are the differences. Catastrophizing mainly involves extremely negative hypothetical future scenarios, while magnification of the negative involves exaggerating the severity or importance of present or past negative events. But what about the pessimistic fortune-telling? It also focuses on predicting negative future scenarios. True, the main differences are the degree of intensity and the levels of anxiety they cause. In catastrophizing, the predictions are extremely negative and specific, such as terminal cancer or a fatal accident. In pessimistic fortune-telling, the predictions are generally negative and less specific, such as, "I will surely not get that job." As a result, the levels of stress and anxiety they cause are significantly different. In the case of catastrophizing, anxiety is extremely higher compared to pessimistic fortune-telling. Mind reading. This cognitive distortion describes a tendency to assume you know what other people think without concrete evidence. How many times has it happened to you that your partner responded to you in a more cold and detached way than usual? I imagine it's happened to everyone. Those who suffer from this distortion might think something like, "They're mad at me, but I haven't done anything wrong. How can they be mad at me? I was careful about what I said and was very patient in listening to them. Screw them." You start having these thoughts when perhaps you have nothing to do with it and your partner simply had a bad day at work. What you've done is basically read their mind, presuming you did something wrong when, objectively, you can't know that. If your partner responds coldly, it doesn't necessarily mean you did something wrong. If the girl you like hasn't responded for over 24 hours, she may have serious family or health problems. Maybe she never received your message. What does it mean if a coworker doesn't speak to you all day? Exactly, you don't know. It could mean a lot of things, and assuming what's going through their mind is not the best option. When we start having this distortion and think the other person is thinking something negative about us, we usually react in two ways. In the first, we completely close off to that person, building a wall. In the second, we immediately attack or criticize the other person as a defense mechanism. In either case, reacting in one of these ways could lead to a discussion or distancing, confirming your initial idea that the other person is mad at you, when maybe they weren't. Mind reading can cause resentment, stress, anger, disappointment, insecurity, and hatred. Inappropriate comparison. One of the first lessons we learn in mathematics, especially when teaching grouping, is that we must add similar elements, such as apples go with apples and pears go with pears. They cannot be compared. When you compare yourself to others, you often do exactly this, trying to put apples and pears on the same level, which often works to your disadvantage. Inappropriate comparison is a distorted way of thinking in which a person compares themselves, their situations, or their successes to others in an unrealistic or unobjective way. This type of comparison can lead to feelings of dissatisfaction, inadequacy, or inferiority, even when there are no realistic basis for feeling that way. If you find out that a classmate now works at Google, another plays at La Scala in Milan, another has started their own business, and someone else has joined the military academy, you wonder, and you? What have you done? Compared to them, you feel like a failure. They all seem better and further ahead than you. This type of comparison shows you only one side of the coin, the successes of others, and the most extraordinary moments of their lives, and you compare them with all of yourself, including the things you have not yet achieved. Almost always, appropriate comparisons with others cannot be made. For example, they may be made in sports, but even when you start comparing a soccer player to a basketball player, it becomes tough to compare them, right? And even when comparing two players in the same league, what do you compare? Just one performance? A season? Or an entire career? Does personal life have an impact? I mean, if someone is better than you at soccer, but is divorced, has drug problems, and has depression, does that count? How do you compare it? Exactly. You can't. You can only compare yourself to someone if you live in their body, feel what they feel, and live what they live. At that point, you might get close to comparing yourself to them somehow, but we can't do that. We have different values and principles. We have different life situations, and we give importance to work, relationships, and things in totally different ways. So comparing your life to someone else's makes no sense. Emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is a cognitive distortion in which a person believes that their emotions reflect objective reality. In other words, if someone feels a certain emotion, they think this emotion is concrete proof of facts and reality. Here are some examples. I feel anxious about an exam, so I believe my anxiety is concrete proof that the exam will go badly. I feel guilty, so I must have done something wrong. I feel overwhelmed by a situation, therefore it means I can't handle my situation and problems. I feel inadequate, so I am inadequate. I feel stressed, therefore the teacher is giving us too much homework. I am angry, therefore you are a jerk. I feel unmotivated, so I am a lazy person. I feel insecure when I have to speak in public, so it means I am incompetent. I feel embarrassed about a mistake I made, so I must be a total disaster. I feel satisfied and happy that the presentation went well, so I am a genius. These are all examples in which I am experiencing an emotion and drawing conclusions from that emotion about myself, others, and situations. Clearly, this type of thinking is fallacious, because the emotions you feel do not necessarily reflect objective reality or concrete facts. Emotions are influenced by many internal and external factors, and are not a reliable proof of the truth. Should statements. This is a cognitive distortion in which a person imposes rigid and absolute rules on how things should be, how others should behave, or how they themselves should behave. This type of thinking often leads to feelings of frustration, stress, contempt, guilt, and dissatisfaction because reality rarely conforms to these rigid ideals. The implicit concept of a should statement, such as I should lose weight or I should tidy up the house, is that these are all things you don't want to do but for one reason or another feel obligated to do, or at least they are perceived by our brains in this way. It is a type of self-critical language that only increases the stress you perceive. Not only do you tend to judge yourself harshly, but you also judge others harshly when your expectations are unmet. The most common words of those who fall prey to this distortion are should, must, cannot, and need to. What words can you use to replace these should statements? For example, instead of saying, I should lose weight, say, I want to lose weight. Instead of saying, I should tidy up the house, you can say, I can tidy up the house. Personalization. When we fall into this cognitive distortion, we assume that we are completely or directly responsible for a negative outcome, even when it's not true. We conclude that an event has happened because of our fault, even when we are in no way responsible. This type of thinking can lead to guilt, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Let's give some examples. Is your child doing poorly in school and getting bad grades? It means you're a terrible parent. It's your fault. Or maybe your child may have concentration issues, or may need different study methods. Is your friend in a bad mood while you're having a beer together? It must be your fault. Or maybe they're worried about work, family, or other responsibilities. Is your boss yelling at you? It means you made a serious mistake. Or maybe your boss doesn't handle their emotions well and is going through a very stressful period. You may have made a mistake, but it doesn't mean it's irreparable. Are your parents arguing again? You must have done something to cause this situation. Or maybe they're dealing with personal or relationship issues. It doesn't mean you did something to cause the situation. Every couple has their ups and downs. Incorrectly confusing the possibility of influencing others with having complete control is very common in this type of cognitive distortion. It's important to always remember what your real influence is as an employer, friend, child, parent, employee, and partner. However, remember that not everything is always connected to you, and that having complete control, and therefore full responsibility for what happens, is rare. Focus on what you can truly control and accept that many things depend on external factors and the actions of others. You know at least 10 people who suffer from psychopathy, but you don't know who they are. How can I be so sure? Statistics. It is estimated that today about 80 million people suffer from psychopathy, about 1% of the world's population. If you are over 20 years old, I am sure you have spoken to at least 5,000 different people in your life, and with at least 1,000 of them, you've exchanged more than just a good morning. Now, among these 1,000 people, about 10 of them suffer from psychopathy, and you probably have no idea who they are. Why is it relevant to know who they are? Because some of these people can be dangerous, very dangerous. In today's video, we will discover together what psychopathy is, how to recognize those who suffer from it, and all the myths and misunderstandings surrounding the subject. The further we go, the more pieces will be added that will help you understand psychopathy better than your arrogant friend who studies psychology. You won't just understand understand definitions, but we'll have a complete view of all the most important facets of psychopathy. So, what is psychopathy? Let's start with the etymology. Psycho comes from the Greek psyche, which means soul or mind. Pathy means suffering or disease, so suffering of the soul or disease of the mind. This term was first used in 1888 by the German physician Julius Ludwig August Koch to describe a pathological character deviation. However, as early as 1801, the French physician Philippe Pinel had described a similar disorder, calling it mania without delirium. In 1941, American psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley published the book The Mask of Sanity, where he outlined the diagnostic criteria for psychopathy, describing it as a personality disorder characterized by a lack of empathy, egocentrism, and antisocial behavior. Based on Cleckley's criteria, Canadian psychologist Robert Hare developed the Psychopathy Checklist in 1980, a diagnostic assessment tool for psychopathy. Finally, in 1991, over 100 years after the modern use of the term psychopathy, Robert Hare released the final version of the Psychopathy Checklist known as PCLR, which remains today the fundamental tool used to diagnose those suffering from psychopathy. So, what is the definition of psychopathy? Is it a personality disorder? Is it a mental disorder? Giving the definition of this term is much more complicated than it might seem. You will often hear that psychopathy is a personality disorder. Technically, this is incorrect. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as DSM-5-TR, often referred to as the Bible of Psychiatry, there are only 10 personality disorders listed. Psychopathy is not one of them. Many mistakenly use the term psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder interchangeably, claiming they are the same thing, and that psychopathy is just a more extreme version of the antisocial disorder. Others believe there are many similarities between these two constructs, but technically they are different. Let's first look at antisocial personality disorder. To diagnose it according to the DSM, the individual must present at least 3 or more of these criteria: violation of social norms, deceitfulness and tendency to lie, impulsivity, irritability and aggressiveness, recklessness for one's own or others' safety, consistent irresponsibility, lack of remorse. In addition to the above criteria, the following must also be met. The individual must be at least 18 years old. There must be evidence of conduct disorder before age 15. This disorder includes persistent behaviors such as aggression towards people, torture of animals, bullying, destruction of property, deceitfulness or theft, and serious violation of rules. Moreover, antisocial behaviors must not occur exclusively during schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. These last 3 criteria are neither necessary nor fundamental for the diagnosis of psychopathy. In fact, the individual does not need to be at least 18 years old. There does not need to be a history of conduct disorder before age 15, and it is not crucial whether the individual has episodes of schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. In addition to the possible lack of all these character traits, for the diagnosis of psychopathy, there are many other elements not mentioned in antisocial disorder. But don't worry, we will cover them all later in the video. So why do some psychologists mistakenly use the terms psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder? Probably because most people with psychopathy also suffer from antisocial disorder. But be aware that not all people who suffer from antisocial disorder suffer from psychopathy. Although psychopathy cannot technically be defined as a personality disorder, in the latest version of the DSM, it is defined as a distinct variant of antisocial personality disorder and is widely considered a personality disorder by the scientific community. So we too will define it as a personality disorder. Okay, so we know it is a personality disorder and that it has many points in common with antisocial disorder, but we are still far from a complete definition. Be honest, how many times have you heard someone say, "This person is a psychopath," knowing that what they meant was, "This person is crazy"? Psychopath is commonly associated with someone who is out of their mind. Why do people use the term psychopath as a synonym for crazy? Have you ever heard the word psychosis? Even if it's the first time you've heard this word, you can immediately notice that the first 5 letters of psychopath and psychosis are identical. This is likely where this great confusion comes from. But what does psychosis mean? In the field of psychology and psychiatry, the term crazy is not used. In fact, it doesn't exist. But if it did exist, exist, psychosis would probably be the closest word to define it. Psychosis is a mental disorder characterized by a loss of contact with reality. The main symptoms include hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. Another word with the same first 5 identical letters as psychosis and psychopath is psychologist. Even today, too many people associate someone who goes to a psychologist as someone who is out of their mind. In short, if a word starts with psycho, for many it means crazy. The more you continue watching this video, the more you'll understand that a psychopath is anything but crazy. You're probably like me. You believe that psychopaths exist, but of course, you are not one of them, right? Let me tell you the story of James Fallon. This is James. I don't know about you, but I like James. He reminds me of one of those super kind and permissive grandfathers. James was a renowned professor of psychiatry and human behavior at the University of California. In 2005, he was conducting a study on psychopathy using PET and fMRI scans to analyze the brains of psychopathic criminals. During this period, he decided to include some brain scans of his family as a control group. His intention was to compare the brains of criminals with those of normal individuals. One day, while examining the brain scans, Fallon noticed something startling. One of his family's scans showed all the typical characteristics of a psychopathic brain, but he didn't know whose it was. James couldn't identify the person without invalidating the entire study, so initially he did nothing. However, at some point he thought, I need to know who in my family has this disorder. Thus, he discovered that the person in the family with the psychopathic brain was himself. It is tough to self-diagnose psychopathy correctly, but the more we know about the subject, the higher the chances. That said, would you like to play a game? Choose someone you know well and think might suffer from psychopathy. It could be a friend, a colleague, or a family member. I will ask you a series of questions, and for each question, you will have to give a score from 0 to 2. 0 means the trait or behavior described is absent. 1 means a partial presence of the trait or behavior described. 2 means a significant presence of the trait or behavior described. Ready? Is the person talkative, charming, and capable of making a good first impression on others? Does the person have exaggerated self-esteem and a sense of superiority? Does the person have a constant need for stimulation and get bored easily? Does the person tend to lie continuously without an apparent reason? Is the person considered cunning and skilled at deceiving others? Does the person lack remorse or guilt for their actions? Does the person have superficial emotions and relationships? Is the person insensitive and unable to feel empathy towards others? Does the person tend to exploit others to satisfy their own needs without taking responsibility or contributing productively? Does the person have poor self-control? Does the person have multiple sexual partners indiscriminately without establishing meaningful relationships? Has the person had behavioral problems since childhood? Does the person lack motivation and commitment to achieve long-term goals? Does the person act impulsively without considering the consequences? Is the person irresponsible? Does the person have difficulty accepting responsibility for their actions? Has the person had numerous relationships that lasted for short periods? Has the person had trouble with the law when young? Has the person had parole revoked in the past? Has the person committed a variety of crimes and criminal behaviors? Great. Now that you've answered all these questions, add up all the numbers you wrote down. Before finding out what this number means, write in the comments the number you got. A score from 0 to 8 indicates the absence of significant psychopathic traits. A score from 9 to 17 represents a range where there are some psychopathic traits, but they are not predominant. A score above 18 indicates a high probability of psychopathy. A score of 25 and above in Europe is considered clinically diagnosable as a psychopathy disorder. In the United States, however, diagnosing psychopathy requires a score of at least 30 points out of 40. To give you some point of reference, this is Ted. Ted scored an almost perfect score of 39 out of 40. For those who don't know him, Ted Bundy is one of the most infamous serial killers of the modern era. He has been confirmed to have killed over 30 women, and it is speculated that the number might even exceed 100. The strategy he most often used to lure his victims was to pretend to be injured, using crutches and asking for help, then abducting, raping, and killing them. But exactly where does this score come from? It comes from the list of 20 characteristics on the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, which is today the most widely used clinical assessment tool for diagnosing psychopathy. Technically, the list is this one. I have slightly modified it and put it in understandable question form. Be aware that the score you obtained earlier should be considered for informational and recreational purposes only. The result has no clinical validity. In fact, to be considered valid, the test must be conducted by a psychologist or psychiatrist. The test must be conducted as a semi-structured interview lasting about 2 hours, followed by a comprehensive review of the individual's personal, criminal, and psychiatric history, using information from medical records, police reports, and interviews with family members. As you may have noticed, it is true that from a score of 25 or 30, the presence of psychopathy can be defined, but there are also lower levels. In the past, you either had psychopathy or you didn't. Today, however, it is seen as a spectrum. There are different shades and levels of psychopathy. As we have seen, the 20 items on the psychopathy checklist are not sufficient for a diagnosis. Other tools and information are needed. So there are additional characteristics beyond those we have just seen that are considered associated with psychopathy, and we will see them shortly. I just mentioned Ted Bundy, a ruthless killer, but there are many other serial killers who have been diagnosed with psychopathy. The presence of so many psychopaths among serial killers has led people to believe that all psychopaths are killers, or at the very least, violent. This, however, is not true. In his book, Without Conscience, The Disturbing World of the Psychopaths Among Us, Hare estimated that between 15 and 25% of the prison population can be classified as psychopathic. A very high percentage, but not all who suffer from psychopathy are violent, and I will tell you more. Some of them can be productive members of society. Consider, for example, Jason Fowler, the professor of psychiatry mentioned above. In the book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, Kevin Dutton tries to explore the characteristics of psychopathy and how these can be advantageous in certain professional fields. After a series of research and interviews, he compiled a list of the 10 job types with the highest presence of psychopaths. At number 10, we find the public official. In 9th place, the chef. In 8th place is someone you would never expect, namely the clergy, such as a pastor and priest. In 7th place is the police officer. In 6th place, the journalist. In 5th place is the surgeon. In 4th place is the salesperson. In 3rd place are those working in media, specifically TV and radio. In 2nd place is the lawyer. And in 1st place, the CEO of a company. Why can some psychopathic traits be advantageous in these roles? Many of these jobs often require traits such as charisma, lack of empathy, and the ability to make difficult decisions without emotional involvement. A lawyer defending a person accused of murder must be able to detach from the crime committed by their client and do their best to defend them. The same goes for the surgeon, who must not panic during an operation. Moreover, they must develop the ability to accept that several patients will die under their supervision, something that is extremely debilitating for many doctors. That said, be careful. The fact that they are or seem good at their jobs does not mean they cannot harm people. A striking example of our times is Bernie Madoff, a psychopathic individual who was never violent or convicted of violent crimes. As a billionaire CEO, initially considered a luminary, he turned out to be the greatest fraudster of modern times, ruining thousands of families. We have seen that CEOs of companies are the ones most likely to have psychopathic traits, but how much more likely? In a study conducted by Newman and colleagues, they found that approximately 4% of business executives exhibit significant psychopathic traits. This means 1 in 20 individuals. I promised you that we would explore all the additional characteristics considered associated with psychopathy. Additionally, for greater completeness, I will provide some specific explanations for certain points we have covered in the checklist. Let's start. If you had a cat or a dog, would you ever entertain the idea of cutting off your pet's tail to see how it reacts? A hypothetical situation where you would see the animal suffering significantly, hearing its screams of pain. Probably not, or at least I couldn't do it. It breaks my heart when I accidentally step on my cat's tail, let alone cut it off. Paul Frick, a psychologist who has worked for over 20 years studying the risk factors of psychopathy in children, recounts a story of a child who used a knife to cut off the family cat's tail. But the child did not cut off the tail all at once. Instead, he did it piece by piece over a period of several weeks. When the child was asked why he did this to the cat, he proudly responded, "I want to become a scientist, and I was conducting an experiment. I wanted to see how the cat would react." Causing that pain to the cat not only did not trigger any remorse or regret in the child, but it actually gave him pleasure. Another tendency that psychopaths may exhibit is deriving pleasure from causing harm to others. Psychopaths tend to have a smaller and less active amygdala compared to healthy individuals. Thus, the perception of certain emotions, such as fear, anxiety, and stress, is significantly reduced. If one experiences less fear, there is a tendency to take more risks. On the flip side, boredom becomes a rather prevalent emotion. Feeling fewer certain emotions creates a need for more stimuli to experience what a healthy person feels. This explains why individuals with this disorder are in constant search of stimulation. Hence, it is very common for them to abuse drugs and alcohol. This condition also explains their inability to learn from punishment. What happens when you are a child and do something dangerous or hurt your little brother? Your parents give you negative feedback, scold you, and put you in timeout. When this happens, the child records that interaction and experiences an unpleasant feeling inside, leading to the following association. I punched my brother, I was scolded, I feel a bad sensation, so it's better not to punch my brother again. This process happens for years, sometimes multiple times a day, until the lessons learned through this process build our moral code. For some strange reason, if we think about going to a store and stealing something, the mere thought triggers a set of unpleasant emotions within us that prevent us from doing it. Where do these emotions come from? Clearly, someone taught us from a young age that stealing is wrong. Unfortunately for psychopaths, this natural process is compromised. They cannot learn from punishment. The association, I do something bad, I get punished, so I don't do it again, does not exist. A concrete and practical demonstration of their inability to learn from punishment is found in recidivism data. After a prisoner has served their sentence and is released, there is a 300% greater chance that the prisoner will commit the same crime again if they suffer from psychopathy. Now, I will ask you 3 questions, and I would like you to answer as honestly as possible. You will need to make decisions and tell me what the right decision is. 1. There are 8 people tied to the tracks of a train. The train is about to run them over, and they will all surely die unless you do something. Your only option is to push an extremely old and obese woman onto the tracks to derail the train and save the 8 people. Do you save the lives of the 8 people by killing the woman, or do you let the woman live, condemning the 8 people to the tracks? 2. There is a truck heading towards a person you don't know. If you do nothing, the person will die. However, if you put a penny into a machine, this person will survive. Would you use that penny to save their life? 3. You, your wife, and your 3 children are hiding in the basement. 20 seconds from your home, 10 soldiers looking for survivors want to kill you all. 2 of your children are old enough to understand when you tell them to be quiet, but 1 is a newborn who continues to cry loudly. Covering his mouth is not enough. He still makes too much noise. You have only one option left. Smother your newborn baby or leave him alive and condemn everyone to death. At least 2 of these questions should evoke a profound internal discomfort. It's terrible to have to make such decisions. It's horrifying to choose whether to kill your newborn baby to save the others and yourself. It's horrifying to choose whether to kill an innocent person to save 8. These fall into the category called moral dilemmas, where there is no single correct solution, but all given solutions are not right. Well, all except for the truck scenario. To answer these questions honestly, a healthy person would experience a strong internal conflict. A psychopath would have no such conflict. When faced with similar decisions, there are 2 parts of our brain. The first is the rational one. The rational part, provided there are no legal repercussions, would push the obese woman onto the tracks. After all, 8 lives are worth more than 1. Moreover, the woman would soon die due to her obesity and old age. The same applies to the baby. The most sensible thing to do is to suffocate him. If you don't, everyone dies, including the baby. If you do, no one dies except the newborn. In both cases, the child dies, and only in one, 4 people are saved. These are the reasonings that our rational part would make. However, there is also a second part of our brain, the emotional one, that shudders as soon as it hears these kinds of reasoning. The psychopath does not have this part that shudders, so they have no internal conflict. We might call them cold-blooded. Do you remember when we talked about Ted Bundy? Immediately after his arrest, he told the police, "I'm the most cold-blooded son of a bitch that you will ever meet." A psychopath has such reduced emotional responses, like anxiety, stress, and fear, that they would pass a polygraph test without any issues, regardless of their answers. This also makes them incredibly skilled in lying and manipulating others. We've all lied at least once in our lives, and have been caught in the act at least once. What did you feel when you were caught lying? Guilt? Shame? Well, a psychopath feels none of that. For them, being caught lying feels no different than being caught telling the truth. Nothing changes, and they don't care in the slightest. Their skill in lying and manipulating, using their charisma, is so high that the study The Criminal Psychopath by Keel and colleagues found that psychopathic subjects are 250% more likely to obtain parole compared to non-psychopaths. For those who don't know, to obtain parole, in many cases, you not only have to convince a judge judge, but also a psychologist who conducts an in-depth analysis to determine if you are still dangerous, if you have changed, and if you give the impression that you will not repeat the same mistakes. They can deceive judges and psychologists masterfully. Thus, not only do they have the highest recidivism rate, but they are also the ones most likely to get out early to commit the same crimes again. At the beginning of this video, we saw that there are many similarities between antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy. However, there is another personality disorder that shares several common points. I will tell you more. It is estimated that about 30% of those with psychopathy also suffer from this disorder. The disorder in question is narcissistic personality disorder. However, there are substantial differences that distinguish mere narcissism from a psychopath with narcissistic disorder. A narcissist cares a lot about other people's opinions. When they receive negative feedback or criticism, they pull up their shield of arrogance. The purpose of arrogance is to protect all their insecurities and weaknesses. They may try to make you believe that they don't care at all about what you think, but deep down, they care a lot. A psychopath, on the other hand, genuinely does not care what you think of them. We mentioned earlier that a psychopath feels no shame, whereas a narcissist does, but not for conventional reasons. A narcissist may feel shame and remorse, not because they have empathy for a person they have hurt, but because what they did might put them in a bad light in front of others. Both use charisma and charm, but for two very distinct reasons. A narcissist uses it for validation. They want to be validated and liked. A psychopath has no interest in being admired or liked. They use charm and charisma only if it serves their purpose. They are not always charismatic, but if they need to scam you or get you to open your door so they can rob you, they can become charismatic. Now, let's look at some of the most common myths about psychopathy that we haven't mentioned yet. Psychopaths don't feel emotions. This is false. As we've seen, psychopaths do feel emotions. Some, like fear, are significantly reduced, and some, like shame and guilt, are completely absent. But they are not emotionless human beings. Even though other emotions are also reduced in intensity compared to a healthy person, they can still feel boredom, happiness, excitement, sadness, and so on. Psychopaths are not expressive. They always have a serious face and never smile. I want to address this false myth with a photo. However, there is a small note to make. A study by Martian colleagues found a reduction in emotional expressiveness compared to non-psychopathic subjects. However, depending on the context and their needs, they can use facial expressions very effectively. If they need to charm a jury or make you feel comfortable before killing you, they know how to use their expressions. You can recognize a psychopath by their eyes, or at least you can tell if you pay close attention. Some victims and acquaintances of psychopathic individuals say that looking into a psychopath's eyes is like looking into a reptile's eyes. Indifferent to the situation, their eyes remain the same, empty, cold, and detached. This belief is common and might have some merit. Indeed, if you live long enough with a psychopath, you might notice the moment they stop acting, stop smiling, and become completely expressionless. That said, the chances of recognizing a psychopath by their gaze are close to zero. They are very skilled at using their body and expressions to blend in. They are great manipulators. Let's test my theory. Watch this video.
Think you can spot the psychopath? To answer that question, I've gathered these 11 people. 10 of them are normal, but one of them is a psychopath.
My name is Eli.
Hey, I'm Jay.
And I'm not.
I am not.
And I am not.
A psychopath.
Who among these 9 people do you think is a psychopath? Later in the video, I will reveal which of these 9 characters is a psychopath. I want to give you a hint already though. It's probably none of the women. Why? Because it is estimated that the prevalence of psychopathy in men is about 3 times higher than in women. A psychopath can fall in love and feel emotional affection for someone other than themselves. Unfortunately, this is also not true. A psychopath can have a boyfriend or girlfriend and can even get married, but they do not feel the emotion of love as we know it. To love means to sacrifice, to feel emotional empathy, and to sometimes put the other person's interests before our own, something a psychopath could never do. However, a psychopath can feel a strong sexual attraction and can make you believe they love you. That's for sure. An example that made me understand how they cannot feel this type of affection is this. Imagine you lose a brother, your mother, or your wife. Would you go to the funeral? The answer is obviously yes. What a psychopath would do is find an excuse not to go. Not because they suffer too much, but because the funeral is boring and they found a party where they can have fun. Now that we have a very well-defined picture of all the characteristics of psychopathy, 2 spontaneous questions arise. Are you born a psychopath or do you become one? And can psychopathy be cured? Many psychopaths come from healthy and normal family situations without abuse. In early studies conducted by psychologist Hare, it was shown that there were no differences between criminal and non-criminal psychopaths in their family histories. Later, in 2006, Hare and Newman found some correlations. They found that psychopaths who come from low socioeconomic environments had a higher tendency to develop a more severe form of psychopathy. So, how significant is the environmental part compared to the genetic one? In the 2005 study by Whiting and colleagues called Evidence for Substantial Genetic Risk for Psychopathy in 7-year-olds, it was discovered that in monozygotic twins who have the same genetic material, if one of the twins has psychopathic traits, it is very likely that the other twin will have them too. However, someone might say, how can we be sure it's not an environmental issue since the twins are born and raised together in the same family? Well, the study also conducted the same research with dizygotic twins, who share only 50% of their genetic material. What they found is that if a dizygotic twin is psychopathic, the probability that the other twin is also psychopathic is significantly lower than for the monozygotic twins. Researchers estimate that about 70% of psychopathic traits are inheritable, meaning they are genetically transmitted. So psychopaths tend to have a set of genes that increases the likelihood of developing a psychopathic brain. These genetic and brain structure modifications then come into contact with the environment to transform the person into either a criminal or non-criminal psychopath. So are you born a psychopath or do you become one? The answer is both, but the genetic part is the most predominant. Can psychopathy be cured? If psychopathy has a significant genetic prevalence, can we modify the genes that lead to psychopathy? Theoretically, yes. In practice, it is still something far-fetched. Unfortunately, there is not a single gene that leads to psychopathy, but dozens of possible genes, and there could be others that we have not yet discovered. Moreover, we do not yet have the medical expertise to remove all these genes. Okay, with genetics, we can't do anything yet, but could we focus on training to develop greater empathy? If we could make these people feel empathy, many of their other problematic characteristics could lessen, transforming them into healthier individuals. Empathy can be trained. Behaviors can be changed. In theory, all this is possible. There is just one small, huge problem. The psychopath should want to do it, but they don't want to do it because they genuinely do not believe that there is anything wrong with them, or that they need to change. On the contrary, having empathy, guilt, or remorse are just elements of weakness, which they themselves use against others. So changing behavior and trying to become more empathetic would mean becoming weaker and more vulnerable, the exact opposite of what someone with psychopathy aims to be. However, you might have an objection to this point. We said that those with psychopathy cannot feel empathy, which is true, but not entirely correct. We can divide empathy into two categories: emotional empathy and cognitive empathy. In emotional empathy, the subject understands and even feels emotions similar to the person in front of them. This is the type of empathy that the psychopath cannot feel, not even with training. Then there is the second type of empathy, cognitive empathy, which is the ability to understand others' perspectives and emotions without necessarily sharing those emotions. This can be trained. The problem, once again, in this case, is not so much the ability to develop this cognitive empathy, but rather how they use it. If the psychopath develops this skill and does not have a moral compass, they will use it as an additional tool to manipulate and get what they want. The only remaining element to work on is the environment. The environment in which a psychopath is born and raised seems to be the only significant element with which one can attempt to raise a psychopath in a way that they do not become a dysfunctional person for themselves and others. There are two main problems. The first is that even if you are born into a family without abuse that gives you love and is present for you, unfortunately, the individual could still develop dysfunctional behaviors. The second is the difficulty. In theory, parents should develop the ability to recognize the first psychopathic traits in their child, learn how to best treat them, take them to therapy, undergo therapy themselves, and instill in them a functional desire. There is a significant presence of non-criminal psychopaths in society who are lawyers, surgeons, chefs, or CEOs. The idea of helping and considering others must become a tool that encourages psychopaths to voluntarily choose to develop functional behaviors for society. This approach is more effective than coercive or punitive methods. If psychopaths understand that behaving pro-socially and altruistically can be greatly beneficial to themselves, they are more likely to repeat such behaviors even as adults. Finally, there is one last possibility, which is more of a characteristic. It has been noted that as years go by, when a psychopath ages, they tend to calm down more and reduce all of those harmful practices for others. This effect is called psychopathic burnout. Something is missing. I feel that something very important is still missing. But what? Of course. Nowadays, there is a term that people use much more frequently than the term psychopath to describe a person with psychopathic traits. This term is sociopath. The question naturally arises, do sociopath and psychopath mean the same thing, or are there substantial differences? Both sociopathy and psychopathy represent conditions characterized by significant difficulties in relating to others and following social norms. However, the distinction between the two terms is debated among experts, and there is no unanimous consensus. The term sociopathy is not officially recognized in modern psychiatry, and many professionals prefer to use the term antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy. Some consider sociopathy as a less severe form of psychopathy or a variant of psychopathy, while others believe the two terms mean the same thing. The opinions on the distinction between sociopathy and psychopathy can be summarized as follows: impulsivity versus calculation. Sociopaths are believed to be more impulsive and tend to react emotionally, while psychopaths are considered more calculating and cold in their behaviors. Social integration. Psychopaths often manage to mask their disorder better, integrating better into society and maintaining a facade of normality. Sociopaths, on the other hand, tend to be less organized and create more tumultuous relationships. Origin of the disorder. Psychopathy has a predominant genetic component, while sociopathy might derive more from environmental and developmental factors. Consider a practical example. If a colleague criticizes the work of two people, one sociopathic and one psychopathic, both would react very differently. The sociopath might immediately confront the colleague, raise their voice, or even resort to violence. In contrast, the psychopath would show no immediate emotional reaction, but might plan revenge that would manifest itself months later. For instance, they might put drugs in their colleague's car and then make an anonymous call to the police. Well, we have reached the last and perhaps most important point of this video. What to do if you think someone is a psychopath. Addressing how to deal with a person you suspect might be a psychopath requires both philosophical and moral reflection. How should we treat someone who could potentially become a criminal or a murderer? Is it right to treat them as if they already are? It is crucial to judge people based on their actions rather than what they might do. There are psychopaths who live functionally within society, maintaining their characteristics without becoming criminals. If you sense something odd about a person, it is more useful to focus on their behaviors rather than on potential clinical diagnosis. Would you trust someone who has blatantly lied to you or shows no remorse? Probably not. It is important to remember that people are not defined by their diagnosis. Someone suffering from autism is not autistic, just as someone with cancer is not the cancer. The same goes for psychopathy. I have often used the term psychopath because it is widely used and known in common parlance, but I strongly advise against using it to describe someone. Not only is it not a technical term, but it also confuses the disorder with the person, which are two distinct things. If you suspect that someone might exhibit psychopathic traits, it is wise to remain vigilant. However, treating this person as a criminal based solely on suspicions would be ignorant. It makes more sense to decide how to act based on observed behaviors. The dynamics and complexity vary depending on the type of relationship you have with this person. Whether it's a parent, friend, partner, colleague, child, or superior, each relationship presents unique dynamics. In complex situations, it might be helpful to consider a coach or psychologist for support. Remember that everything a person with psychopathic traits says might be false or distorted. Do not trust them as readily as you would a friend. In many situations, your relationship with this person can remain strictly transactional. Both of you might use each other for your own purposes, and recognizing this is fundamental. Consider that a person with psychopathic traits might not be able to empathize with you, and probably doesn't genuinely care about you as a friend, partner, or employer. If, for instance, you discover that an employee or colleague of yours constantly lies or tries to make you look ridiculous, you might decide to distance yourself from this person. It is important to distinguish between lies of varying severity. The lie, "I can't go out for coffee because something came up," can be considered a circumstantial lie, common to many of us. These lies are not necessarily indicative of psychopathy, but may stem from the fear of hurting someone or rejecting an invitation. On the other hand, more serious lies, such as those concerning infidelity or taking credit for work that is not theirs, require more careful evaluation. In such cases, regardless of the possibility that the other person suffers from psychopathy, it might be wise to cut ties. Did you really get this far? Congratulations! As promised, I will now reveal which of the 9 characters has the psychopathic disorder. Let me know in the comments if you guessed correctly. It was him. Level 1. I am the only one. Everyone is born at this level. Here, sensations and stimuli completely control our lives. The sole objective is survival. At this level, however, you are unaware of what survival truly means. So what do? Whatever you feel like doing. Are you thirsty? You look for something to drink. Are you hungry? You seek food. Are you cold? You cover up. Are you hot? You uncover. In this phase, there is a direct and immediate connection between stimulus and response. There is no critical thought about the stimulus or the emotions you are experiencing. You simply flee from pain and danger and chase after pleasure and a safe place. This is the level where only one person exists in the world, and that person is you. Your needs are the only thing that matters, or rather, they are simply the only thing. In this stage, if you were holding your newborn child and suddenly encountered a huge tiger while walking, you would run away without even considering your child, simply leaving them where they are because they are a burden and slow you down. Your only objective is to satisfy any need that arises. At this level, we are not aware that other people can feel and experience the same emotions, sensations, desires, and needs as we do. The higher the level of thought you reach, the greater your awareness. Greater awareness leads to a better understanding of yourself and the world around you. This was the basic level of awareness. Level 2. I am not the only one. At this level, I am aware that other people or entities exist, and that they have needs and desires like mine. However, the most important thing remains myself. The awareness that others have similar needs and desires is leveraged to get what I want from them. I want them to behave in a way that allows me to fulfill my own needs. A child who does their homework doesn't do them to make their mother happy, but to satisfy their need to be loved, accepted, and praised. The child knows that if they make their mother happy, thus fulfilling her needs, they will get what they want. This isn't altruism, it's a more sophisticated form of pure selfishness. I mentioned entities earlier because our understanding of the world includes belief in entities such as gods, monsters, wizards, angels, and even Santa Claus. We think they are like us, with needs and desires similar to ours. To gain the favor of the god of war, we dance, sing, and offer animal sacrifices. To receive gifts from Santa, we behave well. To avoid going to hell, we follow certain principles and behave morally. I am aware that my actions have effects on other people or entities. Therefore, I act in a way that maximizes my benefits and minimizes my disadvantages. Level 3. Others are aware. Nearly the entire world population reaches this level upon reaching adulthood. At this stage, we understand that not only do other people have needs, desires, and emotions, but they are also aware that we are aware of the fact that other people have the same awareness. Example, John is at level 2. John knows that Mike needs to eat, so he offers Mike food in exchange for protection. Why? Because Mike is none other than our friend Mike Tyson. Well, I would want his protection too. However, Mike is at level 3 and is aware that John is giving him food, likely because John has a secondary motive and wants to satisfy his own needs. With this additional awareness, Mike has more choices. He can accept the food and offer protection, or decline the food and seek it elsewhere because he doesn't want to be John's personal bodyguard. There's also a third option. Mike could punch John in the face, take the food, and leave. Just kidding. Mike wouldn't do such a thing. At level 3, we start to develop some critical thinking and ask a few more whys. Referring back to the example, when John offers food to Mike, Mike might ask, why is John offering me food that he could eat himself? What does he want from me? Level 4. We are in the same boat. This is the level of awareness in our modern society. At this stage, we develop collective awareness. In addition to knowing that other people have needs and desires and can reason like us, we now have a broader view of the whole. Now we are aware of the concept of society, a collective of individuals with their own desires, circumstances, and thoughts, but who must, of necessity, submit to rules. Why do they have to submit to these rules? Because we understand that the absence of rules leads to chaos, and chaos is bad. We realize that despite diverse thinking, following rules is functional for the life of the whole, that is, society. Now, we see not only ourselves, but also the collective. Following this principle, order and rules are good. Chaos and people who do not follow these rules are evil and must be stopped. At this point, the concepts of morality and ethics are introduced. The judge in a courtroom is the highest expression of this level. The judge is an external person who listens to the viewpoints and situations of each person in conflict. Following rules or laws, in this case, serves the collective good. But how are these rules and laws created? Through a process of agreement and majority. Are most of us in agreement that stealing is wrong? Yes. Why is it wrong? For all these X reasons. Are there exceptions? Well, once all these questions are answered, we agree and create these laws that apply to everyone. Level 5. Perhaps this rule is wrong. Rules are established based on what the majority of people, or those in power, consider right or wrong. However, deciding what is right and wrong leaves room for interpretation. Is what many believe to be right or wrong always truly right or wrong? Are rules always right? Let's consider an example. During the Nazi Germany era, hiding and protecting Jewish children was illegal. It went against the rules. Not following this rule could lead to imprisonment, or worse. However, a person at level 5 would question, despite the clear laws, on what assumption are they based? They are based on the assumption that Jews are an inferior race. Is this assumption objectively true? The answer is no. Therefore, the law is wrong. At level 5, a new awareness emerges. Objectivity supersedes personal desires, and it also supersedes laws and rules. Since objectivity and the pursuit of truth dominate at this level, rules are questioned. Different realities and perspectives are considered apart from our own. The entire picture is analyzed as objectively and logically as possible. There are more than 200 cognitive biases. Knowing and remembering them all is difficult, if not impossible, for most people. It would take you over 15 hours just to read through them once. But what if you could condense all these biases into less than 30 minutes? That is the goal of this video. I will explain the 17 strategies and the 3 main problems that underlie almost all cognitive biases. For this video, I drew inspiration from the incredible work of Buster Benson, who in 2016 attempted to summarize them into 20 strategies and 4 problems. In the video description, you'll find the key changes I made, reducing the original 20 strategies to 17 and the 4 problems to 3. You'll also find links to the websites, sources, and studies I will mention. Let's start with the basics. What on earth are cognitive biases? They are systematic errors in thinking that influence both judgment and decision-making. They are mental shortcuts that the brain uses to quickly process information and make decisions. Why is it important to understand them? Because if we increase our awareness of the decision-making errors we make every day, there's a good chance we can significantly reduce the number of those mistakes. Making fewer mistakes means losing less money, saving more time, avoiding a lot of unnecessary suffering, and preserving important relationships. There are 3 major problems that lead us to rely on cognitive biases. Almost all cognitive biases attempt to solve one or more of these problems. Problem number 1. We live in a world flooded with data and information. Every 24 hours, over 30,000 hours of video are uploaded to YouTube alone. We somehow need to filter all the data we encounter daily. To do this, our brain optimizes, forgets, generalizes, and selects. The real problem arises when we filter out important and useful information. So the first major problem to solve is too much information. There are 7 strategies we use to filter information, and for each strategy, I'll give you an example of a cognitive bias. The first strategy makes us filter information by prioritizing the data that is already stored in our memory. Imagine this situation. You are about to take the practical driving test and you are incredibly nervous. You're nervous because you believe you won't pass the test, not because you haven't practiced enough, but because your mom, dad, and 2 of your best friends all failed on their first attempt. In your mind, it's much more likely that you won't pass, but the statistics don't lie. For example, in Italy, according to a study conducted by M-Up Research in collaboration with Norstat, around 90% of people passed the practical test on their first attempt. So why do you have this irrational belief? Why do you feel you will almost certainly fail the practical test on your first try? This is called the availability heuristic, a bias that explains why people tend to overestimate the likelihood of an event based on how easily they can recall similar examples. In your case, you believe you'll fail on your first attempt because the first examples that come to mind of other people taking the driving test are all of those who failed on their first try. The second strategy makes us filter information by giving more importance to unusual or surprising things, or by ignoring information we consider ordinary or obvious. Instead of explaining the von Restorff effect, which describes this strategy quite well, I want you to experience it directly. Read the following list only once. At some point in the video, I will ask you a question, and if you can answer it, it means you've experienced this cognitive bias. The third strategy makes us filter information by giving more importance to things that change rather than those that remain the same. Imagine you're about to buy a new car, a Tesla Model 3. You start doing your research, studying all the features, possible colors, accessories, and you spend hours watching videos on its performance. You do this for an entire month. What will likely happen is that you'll start noticing a lot of Tesla Model 3s on the road, far more than you noticed the month before. This is due to the frequency illusion bias. Once you've started considering buying a Tesla, your brain begins to filter information, placing more importance on what has changed. In this case, your awareness of Teslas. The actual number of Teslas on the road probably hasn't changed from one month to the next. What has changed is how important that car has become to you. The fourth strategy makes us filter information by giving more importance to the information that confirms our existing beliefs. On the contrary, it makes us ignore those that contradict them. Have you ever heard of the three-number test? In 1960, British psychologist Peter Cathcart-Wasson devised an experiment that became famous in the study of deductive reasoning. Participants were shown a sequence of three numbers, such as 2, 4, and 6. Their task was to figure out the rule behind this sequence. To do so, they could suggest other sequences of three numbers and receive immediate feedback on whether the new sequence followed the hidden rule. What's astonishing is that only 20% of participants managed to discover the correct rule. Not because the rule was difficult, even a child could have found it. The reason why 80% of participants got it wrong was due to the confirmation bias. The sequence 2, 4, 6 led most participants to hypothesize that the rule was the next number increases by 2. But this was not the correct rule. The actual rule was any sequence of numbers in ascending order. The mistake made by 80% of participants was to look only for evidence that confirmed their initial hypothesis, rather than exploring other possibilities that might have disproved it. For example, instead of suggesting a sequence like 1, 2, 3 or 0, 10, 20 to see if the rule was simply increasing numbers, many kept proposing sequences like 8, 10, 12 or 14, 16, 18, which confirmed their initial hypothesis of increments of 2. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses while ignoring or minimizing evidence to the contrary. The fifth strategy makes us filter information by noticing the flaws in others more easily than we notice our own. Imagine living in the United States and finding yourself in a room with about 600 people. You're asked a question to which you must respond honestly. Compared to the average American, do you think you have more or fewer biases? What would your answer be? You would probably say fewer. How do I know that? Emily Pronin, a psychology professor at Princeton University, conducted a very similar study to the scenario I've just described. The result, of the 600-plus participants, more than 85% believed they had fewer biases than the average American. Only one person thought they had more. Obviously, this result can't be accurate. About 50% of people should have believed they were below average, and about 50% should have thought they were above average. This demonstrates what is called the blind spot bias, which describes the human tendency to easily recognize biases in others while failing to see the impact of biases on oneself. The sixth strategy makes us filter information by modifying and reinforcing certain memories after an event. In a study conducted in 1978 by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus and colleagues, the participants watched a series of slides showing a car accident. In one of the slides, a car was stopped at a stop sign. Later, the participants were asked questions about the details of the accident, and one group was given a misleading question. Instead of asking about the stop sign, the researchers mentioned the red traffic light, thus suggesting a false detail. After this phrase, the participants took a memory test where they had to recall what they had actually seen in the original slides. Many of them, influenced by the misleading question, incorrectly remembered seeing a red light instead of the stop sign that was present in the images. This experiment demonstrated how the insertion of false or misleading information could alter witnesses' real memories, creating false memories with a high degree of certainty. This is a perfect example of how the suggestibility bias can manifest. The memory of an event is contaminated by external information, leading the person to remember a detail that was never actually there. The seventh strategy makes us filter information by ignoring details and forming generalizations based on only the elements we deem important. In 1932, Frederick Bartlett conducted an experiment based on the War of the Ghosts. He asked a group of British participants to read this ancient Native American story. The main characteristic of the War of the Ghosts is that it contained details and themes unfamiliar to Western culture, such as supernatural elements. After the reading, he asked all the participants to recall and retell what they remembered from the original story at varying time intervals. He asked immediately after reading, after a few days, after weeks, and even after months. From this study, Bartlett observed that 1. Culturally unfamiliar details were often omitted or simplified. 2. Elements more consistent with the participants' own culture were emphasized or elaborated. 3. The story became progressively shorter and more stereotyped in subsequent recollections. This study demonstrated the existence of the leveling and sharpening bias, which refers to the cognitive process that leads to reducing or ignoring less relevant details of information or experiences, while highlighting or exaggerating aspects considered more important. Do you remember the list of 15 words I showed you a few minutes ago? How many of those words can you recall? If you only remember 4 or 5, and one of them is flying penguin, then you've fallen into the von Restorff effect, also known as the isolation effect. This cognitive bias explains our tendency to isolate and more easily remember elements that stand out starkly from others. In our case, flying penguin was the only word on the list made up of 2 words and not easily associated with the other 14. Alright, now let's move on to the second major problem that causes us to rely on cognitive biases. Problem number 2. The world is a complex place, extremely complex. There are many things we don't understand. Not understanding things scares us a lot. To feel less afraid, we create stories and patterns that give meaning to what we don't comprehend. A life without meaning is terrifying, so we tend to search for meaning everywhere, even when it doesn't exist. The second problem is the lack of meaning. There are 6 strategies we use to give meaning, and for each strategy, I'll cite a cognitive bias. The first strategy helps us make sense of things by making us believe we know what others are thinking. In some cases, this means we assume they know what we know. In other cases, we assume they're thinking about us as much as we think about ourselves. Have you ever felt like you were the center of attention, feeling uncomfortable and anxious, as if all eyes were on you, even in mundane situations? While working out at the gym, during a business meeting, or simply walking down the street with a new outfit or different hairstyle. This feeling might be due to the spotlight effect, a cognitive bias that leads us to overestimate how much others focus on us. In other words, it seems as if every little detail of our lives is under a magnifying glass, when in reality, most people are too busy thinking about themselves to notice us. If you've ever felt like you were under a microscope, constantly being judged by others, believe me, you're not alone. I've created a course to help people like you. In this course, I delve into effects such as the spotlight effect and the cognitive distortion known as mind reading, which leads us to believe we know what others are thinking. You'll learn how to free yourself from the fear of judgment from others. You'll understand how to recognize when you're experiencing anxiety and the difference between normal worries and an actual social anxiety disorder. You'll learn what I believe are the best techniques and strategies for managing this type of anxiety in just a few minutes, and in some cases, databases in a few seconds. Oh, by the way, the course is completely free. You can find the link with all the information in the description. Now, back to us. The second strategy helps us make sense of things by finding stories and patterns, even when we have scattered or incomplete data. In 1967, two American psychologists, Lauren J. Chapman and Gene P. Chapman, conducted an experiment. They presented a group of university students with a series of drawings supposedly made by imaginary psychiatric patients. Each drawing was accompanied by a fictional psychiatric diagnosis. However, the students didn't know that both the drawings and the diagnoses were invented, and there was no real correlation between the features of the drawings and the diagnoses provided. They had been paired randomly. The participants were asked to examine these drawings and the associated diagnoses, and then to identify which characteristics of the drawings were associated with specific diagnoses. These illusory associations tended to align with stereotypical or intuitive beliefs about mental illness. For example, many participants reported noticing that patients diagnosed as paranoid tended to draw particularly large or detailed eyes, even though this correlation didn't actually exist in the data presented. Similarly, participants reported other associations such as large heads for patients with concerns about intelligence or muscular figures for patients with concerns about masculinity. This experiment demonstrated that people tend to perceive relationships or correlations between variables even when these objectively do not exist. This phenomenon is known as the illusory correlation bias. The third strategy helps us make sense of things by filling in missing information with stereotypes and generalizations based on prior knowledge. This process allows us to fill gaps with plausible assumptions, even if we later forget which parts were based on reality and which were based on speculation. In 1976, Duncan Burt conducted a study with 96 white university students showing them two types of films. In one, a white student was attacking a black student. In the other, the exact opposite occurred. A black student was attacking a white student. The act of aggression was identical in both videos. Afterward, participants were asked to explain the reasons for the violence, and these were the results. When the aggressor was black, the violence was attributed to internal traits, such as personality or the nature of the group, with the assumption that black people are inherently violent. Conversely, when the aggressor was white, the violence was often justified by external factors, such as stress or provocation. This study, along with many others that followed, demonstrated the existence of a cognitive bias known as the ultimate attribution error. This bias shows how people tend to attribute the causes of behaviors differently depending on whether the actions were carried out by members of their own group or by members of other groups. The fourth strategy helps us make sense of things by making us believe that the things and people we know or like are better than those we don't know or dislike. Have you ever heard of Lance Armstrong? He was considered a national hero and a source of inspiration for many. He won 7 consecutive Tour de France titles. No one in the world has ever been able to replicate such an achievement. In addition, Armstrong also survived cancer and founded the Live Strong Foundation, a charity dedicated to fighting cancer, which raised millions of dollars. Armstrong's public image was that of an undisputed champion, a courageous survivor, and a generous philanthropist. This positive perception created a powerful halo effect around him. However, in 2012, he was accused of doping. Many of his supporters initially refused to believe the allegations precisely because of the halo effect generated by his positive public image. When Armstrong finally admitted in 2013 to using performance-enhancing drugs throughout his career, the revelation shocked the public. Many people felt betrayed and struggled to believe that someone who seemed to embody such positive values could have deceived the world for so long. This case clearly demonstrates how the halo effect can influence people's judgment. Armstrong's reputation as a successful athlete and philanthropist had created such a positive image that many couldn't conceive of his involvement in illicit activities. In fact, the halo effect distorts the perception of one trait of a person or thing, influencing the evaluation of their other traits. Other examples of the halo effect include judging someone as intelligent because they are physically attractive, considering an expert in one field to be competent in all areas, trusting a celebrity's opinion on topics they are not an expert. The fifth strategy helps us make sense of things by simplifying probabilities and numbers. In 2008, most people, including financial analysts and large institutional investors, were convinced that the housing market would continue to grow as it had in previous years. They ignored alarming signs, such as granting 3, 4, or even 5 multi-million-dollar mortgages to strippers who couldn't afford them. They overlooked this and many other red flags because they believed that the growth and the prevailing situation were the new normal, destined to last forever. In hindsight, even after the release of the film The Big Short, it seemed obvious that this situation couldn't continue, and yet almost no one foresaw the impending disaster. But why? There are several reasons, but one that played a crucial role is the normalcy bias. This bias describes people's tendency to believe that things will continue to function in the future as they have in the past, thereby underestimating the likelihood of negative or catastrophic events. People tend to perceive the current situation as the norm, rejecting the idea that something unexpected could happen. The sixth strategy helps us make sense of things by projecting our present mindset and assumptions into the past or future. Do you think the quality of a decision depends on its outcome? Obviously, the answer is no. Let me give you an example. Imagine taking all the money you have in the bank and going to a casino. Once there, you bet everything on red 23. The ball actually lands on 23, earning you 36 times your savings. If you had bet $20,000, you would now have $720,000. Betting all your savings is a stupid decision. Even if by sheer luck you were to win, this wouldn't make the decision any less stupid. It just makes you very lucky. This was a fairly obvious example. But what happens when the situation isn't so clear? In a 1988 study, Barron and Hershey created a series of hypothetical scenarios in which a doctor had to decide whether to perform a risky operation to save a patient's life. In one scenario, the operation succeeded, while in the other, it failed. The participants in the study had to evaluate the quality of the doctor's decision to proceed with the surgery. Despite the fact that in both cases the doctor made the same decision based on the same information when the operation failed, participants tended to judge the decision negatively. This was due to outcome bias, which describes the tendency to judge the quality of a decision solely based on the final result rather than on the processes and information available at the time the decision was made. Finally, we've arrived at the third major problem that leads us to rely on cognitive biases. Problem number 3. As we've seen, there is one resource in our world that is virtually infinite: information. On the other hand, there is another resource that is finite and very scarce: our time. Since our time is limited, we must by necessity make quick decisions. Quick decisions often lead to overlooking important factors and jumping to conclusions that may be incorrect. The third problem is that time is limited, but we still need to act. There are 4 strategies we use to act quickly. For each strategy, I'll cite a cognitive bias. The first strategy helps us act more quickly by making us more confident in our abilities. In 1977, Lichtenstein and Fishoff published an interesting study. In this study, participants were asked to answer a series of general knowledge questions, some of which were more difficult and others easier. The researchers then asked the participants to estimate the likelihood that their answers were correct. The results were as follows. The participants overestimated their chances of having answered the difficult questions correctly, believing their answers were much more accurate than they actually were. Conversely, when it came to the easy questions, the exact opposite occurred. Participants tended to underestimate the quality of their answers, displaying a lack of confidence that was disproportionate to their actual competence. This tendency is explained by the hard-easy effect, which illustrates how people tend to be overly confident when facing complex tasks and lack confidence in their abilities when the tasks are relatively easy. The second strategy helps us act more quickly by making us favor things that are immediate and easy to understand. Imagine the following offer. A. You receive $100 immediately, directly into your bank account. B. You receive $105 in your bank account in 1 month. Rationally, waiting a month to receive $105 is clearly the better option. By waiting, you'll earn 5% more in just a single month. However, many people tend to choose option A, preferring the immediate $100. Now, let me present the same offer, slightly modified. A. You receive $100 in 5 years and 8 months. B. You receive $105 in 5 years and 9 months. In this second case, most people would tend to choose option B, preferring to wait an additional month to gain the extra $5. But if you think about it, in both cases, you are waiting an extra month to get $5. So why is there a difference in choice? The change in decision is due to a bias known as hyperbolic discounting. This bias causes people to prefer immediate reward rewards over larger rewards in the future, disproportionately devaluing rewards that are further away in time. In practice, people tend to give greater value to immediate rewards than to future ones, even when, rationally, waiting would be the better choice. In the example we just discussed, the key difference isn't the 1 month of waiting, but the fact that in the first scenario, the choice is between having the money immediately or in the future. In the second scenario, immediate gratification is absent. Therefore, the decision becomes choosing between money in the distant future or more money in the distant future. The third strategy helps us act more quickly by motivating us to finish what we've started, giving more value to something we've already invested time and energy into. Would you ever pay 63% over the actual price for an identical item? It sounds absurd, but believe me, the answer is yes. In 2011, Norton and colleagues conducted a study on IKEA furniture. After recruiting participants, some assembled the furniture themselves, while others were given pre-assembled versions. After the assembly, participants were asked to estimate the value of the furniture they had created or received. What they found was that people were willing to pay 63% more for the furniture they had assembled themselves. This is due to the IKEA effect, a cognitive bias that leads us to attribute disproportionate value to products we have partially created because we have invested time and energy into them. The fourth strategy helps us act more quickly by preferring options that seem simple or have more complete information compared to those that are ambiguous and complex, even when doing the more complex thing is more important. There is a cognitive bias called the rhyme as reason effect. In a study conducted by McGlone and Tofik-Bosch in 2000, researchers asked a group of participants to judge which statements they thought were more accurate and true. The statements were presented in pairs. The meaning of the statements was practically identical, but one of them rhymed and the other did not. For example, what sobriety conceals, alcohol unmasks. What sobriety conceals, alcohol reveals. Now, I don't know about you, but in my opinion, both phrases mean exactly the same thing. The surprising thing about this study was that participants rated the rhyming statements as more accurate and truthful compared to those that didn't rhyme, even though the content was essentially the same. The likely reason lies in our brains. It is much easier for the brain to remember rhyming phrases compared to those without. So, you want to stop taking things personally. You're tired of feeling constantly criticized and judged. You've probably already heard advice like, just ignore what people say, don't let it get to you, or don't overthink it, just let it go. Oddly enough, none of these tips actually work. If anything, they often make things worse. When I was younger, I took everything personally and spent years paying the price for it. My reactions hurt a lot of people, and I damaged important relationships. This is the video I wish I'd had back then. I'm going to explain the terrible consequences of taking things personally, why we do it, and by the end of the video, you'll learn practical, immediately applicable strategies to stop taking things personally. But before we dive in, it's essential to understand what taking things personally actually means. Taking things personally means interpreting an action, comment, or behavior as an attack or offense directed at us. This interpretation leads us to experience unpleasant emotions. Taking it personally doesn't depend on the other person's intentions. We can take things personally whether or not the other person actually intended to attack or offend us. So, what are the consequences of this interpretation? Well, taking things personally, objectively, sucks. We might feel offended, insulted, inadequate, and experience emotions like anger, sadness, resentment, hatred, and disappointment. And unfortunately, that's not the end of it. We all have something called an ego. The ego is like our personal bodyguard. Its only goal is to protect our self-esteem. When we feel inadequate or criticized and experience unpleasant emotions, our ego activates to protect us. How does it do this? By using defense mechanisms. There are many defense mechanisms. The ones closely related to taking things personally are 5. Number 1, denial. Denial is a defense mechanism in which one refuses to accept a painful or uncomfortable reality. In our context, the reality we reject is admitting that something has affected or hurt us. It's a strategy to avoid emotional discomfort by convincing ourselves that the event had no impact. Example, a colleague makes a critical comment about your work during a meeting. You take the criticism personally and are visibly annoyed. Your colleague asks if you're upset, and you immediately say no, even though you actually are. are. Number 2. Acting out. Acting out is a defense mechanism where an individual expresses internal emotions or conflicts through external behaviors, often impulsive or destructive. This can manifest as outbursts of anger, risky behaviors, or actions that jeopardize one's own or others' well-being. Example, your boss criticizes your work in front of everyone, and feeling attacked, you respond aggressively, eventually cursing them out and quitting your job. Number 3. Passive-aggressive behavior. Passive-aggressive behavior involves expressing resentment or anger indirectly without openly addressing the person or situation causing the discomfort. It may take the form of sarcasm, veiled comments, or avoidant behaviors. Example, a friend makes a comment about your outfit saying, "Wow, that sweater is unique. Do you wear it often?" And you passively-aggressively respond by saying, "Oh, thanks. I'm lucky to have a fashion expert friend like you. Maybe next time I should ask you how to dress." Or instead of responding directly, you ignore your friend for the rest of the night, responding in monosyllables. When they suggest doing something together, you vaguely reply, "We'll see. I've been really busy lately," without giving further explanation. Number 4. Displacement. Displacement involves transferring one's emotions, such as anger or frustration, onto another person, or a safe target, rather than directly confronting the source of discomfort. Example, your boss criticizes you and you feel hurt, but you don't want to respond because you're afraid of being fired, so you swallow your pride. However, once you get home, you take out your frustration on your wife and your dog. You behave irritably towards your wife, criticizing her even for small things. As for the dog, you kick it twice in the belly. Neither your wife nor the dog did anything to make you angry, but you've taken your resentment towards your boss and displaced it onto targets with whom you don't run too many risks. Number 5. Rationalization. Rationalization allows a person to justify and explain their behavior or emotions in rational or logical terms, avoiding the truth and deeper emotions. Example, you're part of a friend group but weren't invited to a party. If you rationalize, you might think, "I never really wanted to be part of this group anyway," or "they're shallow people." You react this way to justify your pain and emotional reaction to being excluded, avoiding the feeling of rejection. This can lead you to isolate yourself and avoid forming new relationships, convincing yourself you don't need or want anyone, even when that's not true. Frequent and prolonged use of these defense mechanisms can have significant consequences. It can lead to a deterioration of personal and professional relationships, social isolation, difficulty in growing professionally and personally, and, in extreme cases, even job loss or legal problems. Defense mechanisms are numerous and far more complex than I've just described. If you're interested in a deeper dive, in the description you'll find a link to access a completely free, incredibly detailed masterclass where I explain all the defense mechanisms and how to manage them. There are 3 other harmful consequences of taking things personally. The first is that, after feeling attacked, we may end up labeling that person. In what way? By thinking they're an idiot, a moron, a jerk, or a loser. You get the idea. The problem with labeling is that we tend to see others in a consistently distorted way. In reality, there are no idiots, fools, or jerks. There are people with ideas, behaviors, and values different from our own. This kind of labeling not only distorts our perception of others, but can also negatively affect our future interactions with them. It predisposes us to seek confirmation of our label, ignoring behaviors that contradict it. Tell me, how do you act around someone you consider an idiot, moron, or jerk? How can a relationship like that develop? The second consequence is a concept called rumination. Have you ever found yourself obsessively thinking about a situation that hurt you, constantly dwelling on the same thoughts, mentally reconstructing the scene, imagining responses you didn't give? Well, that's rumination. Rumination is a mental process where a person gets stuck in a loop of negative thoughts, replaying the hurtful event over and over without reaching a resolution. It's like a film that rewinds and starts over from the same point, consuming mental and emotional energy. The problem with rumination is that it amplifies our frustration and sense of offense. Every time we rethink the episode, we relive it, intensifying the unpleasant emotions. The third and final consequence of taking things personally is that it makes it practically impossible to receive feedback or constructive criticism. This puts you in a position where you can't learn from your mistakes. Or worse, you're not even able to identify and accept them, let alone improve. Okay, now that this is clear, why? Why do we end up taking things personally? And perhaps even more importantly, how do we stop? There are 6 reasons that lead us to take things personally. 1. The most significant one by far is low self-esteem. Countless studies have shown links between low self-esteem, problems with emotional regulation, and increased sensitivity to criticism. When we have low self-esteem, we're more inclined to interpret others' words or actions as negative judgments about us. A joking comment, constructive criticism, or even a simple observation can turn into confirmation of our insecurities. It's like having an open wound. That comment hurts. The open wound represents our low self-esteem, and the comment is a finger pressing down on this still bleeding wound. If you think you're not good enough, it's possible to believe that others share the same negative ideas you have about yourself. If you're so self-critical, hurting yourself, you might hate additional pain, especially if it comes from other people. There's a fuel that keeps feeding our low self-esteem. Imagine having a friend who constantly criticizes you, tells you you're worthless, that you're a failure, that you'll never achieve anything meaningful in your life. How long would you stay friends? Probably not long, right? Yet for many of us, this friend is the person we spend the most time with. It's called our internal dialogue. This internal dialogue becomes dysfunctional when it's a constant stream of self-critical thoughts that convince us we're inferior, inadequate, and never enough. So the first practical tip to improve your self-esteem, and thereby taking things less personally, is to start paying attention to your internal dialogue and begin challenging it. I'll give you a personal example. Until a few days ago, I believed I was at least a decent writer. Then I discovered Mario. Mario is a retention specialist who's worked with big names like Mr. Beast. His job is to analyze and improve videos to make sure viewers stay glued to the screen and come back for more. I watched Mario analyze the first minute of several YouTube videos. It was a bloodbath. He found 10 to 15 flaws in almost every video. He talked about things I'd never thought about before. After the video, I thought, I suck. Believe me, the following hour was horrible. Then I decided to confront that little voice in my head telling me how pathetic I was. I asked myself, hey Valentino, why do you think you suck? After a while, I realized that most of the videos he critiqued were in the entertainment genre, a field I've never worked in. Of course, I hadn't thought about certain things. I also noticed that I avoid some mistakes others make, and I discovered a lot of new ideas for improvement. So I asked myself, do I really suck that much? What does sucking even mean? It's not objective. Do I still have a lot to learn? For sure. Do I feel frustrated because I thought I was better? Absolutely. Now, I had 2 choices: feel sorry for myself or decide to improve video after video. I chose the latter. Now, when that thought, you suck at writing, comes up, I take a moment to remember the reflection I made, and within seconds, I realize how absurd it is. Do you know what happens over time? That dysfunctional thought starts to fade. How do I know? When was the last time you thought whales could fly? If we believe something is absurd or doesn't make sense, eventually we stop thinking about it. And here's the big revelation. There are moments in life when you believe something with all your heart and your emotions seem to confirm that belief. Remember, not everything you think is true. Oh, and please don't start using positive affirmations you don't believe in, because they'll only make things worse. I really should make a video explaining how paradoxically positive affirmations can worsen the self-esteem of those who already have low self-esteem. Before we continue, there's another crucial aspect of self-esteem we need to address. One of the most common problems that destroys the self-esteem of the people I work with is identifying their self-worth with the work they do. When your self-esteem depends on your work success, you end up swinging between exaggerated confidence and moments of emotional crisis. So, if you're good at your job, you keep performing well, and you don't make mistakes, you're valuable as a person. You're great. But obviously, things don't always go well. When things don't go well for 100 different reasons, some due to you and others due to things you can't control, you become a worthless human being. If you think about it, it's absurd to believe that you're worth more or less as a human being if you do a better or worse job. For society, you may be more or less useful. You may be paid more or less. However, the value society gives you has nothing to do with the value you have as a human being. There's another symptom of low self-esteem self-esteem that you may have heard of. It's called perfectionism. People with low self-esteem often develop perfectionist tendencies as a coping mechanism. We want to be perfect and behave in an impeccable manner because we believe that if we do things perfectly, then other people won't be able to criticize us. This desire to make no mistakes and to please everyone stems from the fear of others' judgment. We hate criticism because deep down we know how many weak points we have, and we try to mask them with perfectionism. However, this attempt to build an armor of impeccability is destined to fail, imprisoning us in a cage of unrealistic expectations and continuous disappointments. Let me tell you something from the bottom of my heart. You will never be perfect. Never. And that's okay. No one is. There's a quote from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus that I really like. If anyone tells you that such a person speaks ill of you, don't make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, he does not know my other faults, else he would not have mentioned only these. 2. The second reason we take things personally is cognitive distortions. There are several cognitive distortions that affect our perception. Today, we'll look at the 3 most relevant ones regarding to taking things personally. But first, what are cognitive distortions? They are nothing more than irrational thought patterns that make us perceive reality in a distorted way. Surprisingly, these too can devour our self-esteem. The first cognitive distortion is called personalization. This distortion leads us to interpret any behavior or event as directly related to us, even without evidence. It makes us believe we are the cause of others' emotions and actions, increasing our sense of being judged. Example, Marco organizes a dinner with colleagues and notices that one person is less sociable than usual. He immediately starts thinking that his colleague's behavior is due to something he said or did wrong. He doesn't consider that this colleague might simply be tired or worried about something personal. In this case, Marco is personalizing a behavior that might have nothing to do with him. To manage this cognitive distortion, imagine the situation happened to a friend of yours. You must act as a judge, and judges can only reach conclusions based on overwhelming evidence. So ask your friend, what concrete proof do you have that the behavior or situation is because of you? Trust me, often you'll find that there's no solid evidence, just speculation. The second step is to explore alternatives. Ask yourself, what other possible explanations are there that have nothing to do with me? Make a list of possible alternative causes. This will further mitigate the personalization. If this still isn't enough, we come to the final step. Seek concrete evidence. Do you want to confirm or disprove your hypothesis? Ask the person involved directly. In the previous example, Marco could have asked his colleague if he'd done something to irritate him, or if the dinner wasn't to his liking. Why does this technique work? Have you ever noticed how you can give great advice to friends, but struggle to do the same for yourself? Trust me, it's the same for everyone. We can give better advice to others because we're not too emotionally involved in the situation and can analyze it more objectively. Remember, not everything revolves around you. Often, other people's behavior is influenced by factors that have nothing to do with your actions or presence. The second cognitive distortion is called mind reading. This distortion convinces us that we know exactly what others think of us. And guess what? Usually, it's nothing good. We're certain of our interpretations as if we really had direct access to others' thoughts. Example, Laura sends her boss an email with a proposal. She receives a short, formal response, not her boss's usual tone. Without further indications, Laura is convinced that the boss finds her idea stupid. Laura believes she knows what the boss is thinking, that her proposal isn't good, even though it could just be a quick response due to a lack of time. For this distortion, you can use the same strategy we saw with personalization. Imagine the situation happened to a friend, and you're the judge. Ask for concrete evidence, and then make a list of other possible explanations. If this isn't enough, ask the person directly. The third cognitive distortion is called magnification of the negative. This last distortion leads us to exaggerate the importance of the negative aspects of a situation while minimizing the positive ones. It's as if we're using a magnifying glass focused only on mistakes, problems, and criticisms, amplifying them to the point of overshadowing everything else. Example, Chiara, a talented project manager, receives feedback from a client on her latest project. The client is thrilled and praises her work, but adds adds a small suggestion for future improvement. What does Chiara do? Instead of celebrating the overall success, she fixates obsessively on that single comment. That small note suddenly becomes a huge critical remark, leading her to take a simple suggestion personally. How to manage this distortion? 1. Use the friend's perspective. If that comment were made to a friend, how would you interpret it? 2. Analyze. Write down all the elements of the feedback, both positive and negative. Once finished, ask yourself, is the feedback more positive or negative? 3. Use the rule of 10. In 10 days, how relevant will that negative comment be? In 10 months and in 10 years? 3. The third reason we take things personally is cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are thinking errors that lead us to interpret reality in a distorted way. They're like automatic mental shortcuts the brain uses to make quick decisions, but they often lead us to wrong conclusions or make us judge situations less objectively. I know, this definition sounds very similar to that of cognitive distortions. You're right, they have many points in common. However, there are some important differences. Cognitive biases are mental inclinations shared by all human beings. They're part of the natural functioning of the brain. Cognitive distortions, on the other hand, tend to be more personal and vary according to individual factors like stress levels, insecurities, or life experiences. Let's start with what I consider the fundamental bias that makes us take things personally. Our brains are naturally wired to notice and focus on negative aspects, a tendency known as the negativity bias. This inclination has evolutionary roots. For thousands of years, the priority was to avoid danger and ensure survival. One of the critical factors for survival was belonging to a group. At the time, surviving alone was disproportionately harder. Being excluded from this group was practically a death sentence. As a result, we developed an acute sensitivity to potential social threats, which then manifests in our tendency to take things personally. To further complicate this picture, the hostile attribution bias comes into play. This bias leads us, in social interactions, to interpret ambiguous signals as intentionally negative or aggressive. While distinct, these two biases often work in synergy. While the negativity bias makes us generally more attentive to negative stimuli in various contexts, the hostile attribution bias focuses specifically on social interactions, pushing us to interpret others' actions as hostile. Together, these mechanisms explain why others' judgment is so important to us, and why we tend to react defensively even in ambiguous social situations. The third cognitive bias that makes us take things personally was already introduced earlier in this video in the section on low self-esteem, when I said, if you think you're not good enough, it's possible to believe that others share the same negative ideas you have about yourself. This is practically the definition of the projection bias, which leads us to think that others share our emotions, opinions, or insecurities. If we're already insecure about a certain aspect of ourselves, we tend to believe that others notice it too and judge us negatively for it. This leads us to take personally comments or gestures that might actually be neutral or well-intentioned. This belief can intensify even more with the use of the fourth bias, the confirmation bias, which describes our tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms our already existing beliefs. If you believe you're not good enough, the confirmation bias will push you to notice only those signals, even minor ones, that support this idea. How do we combat all these cognitive biases? Well, you've already taken the first step, which is awareness. Now, you're aware of the existence of these biases and how they work. The second step is to recognize when you actually fall, or are about to fall, into these mental traps. One way to do this is to memorize these 4 cognitive biases well. Then, when you feel you're taking something personally, ask yourself, which of the 4 biases I know might be influencing my thinking at this precise moment? If you can identify at least one, the final step is to put yourself in the shoes of an external judge. Ask yourself, what concrete evidence supports your interpretation? And finally, what are the other possible explanations? Another useful tool is to ask someone you trust for an honest opinion. Explain the situation and your concerns to them. This can give you that external perspective you're missing. There's one last tool, a mental exercise that helped me immensely when I misinterpreted people's words or behaviors. I believe I'm a good person. Who doesn't? I try to be kind whenever I can, but there have been many times when, under stress, after an argument, a sleepless night, or a loss, I found myself unfairly harshly judging others. This doesn't make me a horrible person, it makes me human, and reminds me that everyone can have a bad day. If I encounter someone who criticizes, judges, or is simply grumpy, I try to remember my own bad days. I try to remember that maybe this person is just projecting their frustration, just as I have done in the past. So what they're saying, they're not saying it to me or about me, they're saying it because of what they're feeling inside themselves. This doesn't mean passively accepting unjustified outbursts. Sometimes we can listen to help, but if we're unable or simply unwilling to, we can step away from the conversation. 4. The fourth reason we take things personally is sleep deprivation and chronic stress. In this 2007 study conducted by Walker and colleagues, it was shown that sleep-deprived subjects displayed at least 60% more emotional reactivity. In other words, not getting enough sleep drastically increases the likelihood of taking things personally. In this other study, Golker and colleagues demonstrate how chronic stress also leads to a deterioration in the ability to regulate emotions and an increase in emotional reactivity. It may seem like the stupidest and most obvious thing in the world, but adding moments of complete relaxation during the day and reorganizing a plan to sleep more can make an immense difference with minimal effort. 5. The fifth reason we take things personally is emotional sensitivity. Some people are simply more sensitive than others and experience emotions more intensely. This can make them more vulnerable to criticism. If you're one of these people, you just need to accept the situation. It will be harder for you than others, but that doesn't mean you can't improve and make significant progress. What can really make a difference is learning to manage your emotions better. But we all know that's not something we're taught by our parents or at school. I've created a free email mini course to help people better manage their emotions. If you think it could help you, the link is in the description. 6. The sixth reason we take things personally is neurodevelopmental disorders. Specific conditions, such as autism spectrum disorder and ADHD, can influence the ability to interpret social situations and others' intentions, making people more prone to misunderstandings and to taking things personally. If you're a part of this group, try using the strategies from this video. If they don't work, I'd recommend consulting a specialized coach or therapist. Now that we've explored these 6 fundamental reasons, it's time to move on to the next level. I've saved some truly powerful strategies for you. These are the secret weapons that work even when everything else seems to fail. First secret weapon: prepare yourself for a revelation that could radically change your way of thinking. I'm about to show you why, from a purely logical standpoint, it never makes sense to get offended by what others say about us. I'm sure you already know it's impossible to control what people think or say about you. You can try to influence them, but ultimately you cannot control them. So when someone says or thinks something about you, the only thing you can do is accept it. This doesn't mean accepting that what's said is true. At this stage, it's quite irrelevant whether the person's thoughts or words are accurate. The point is to accept that people have the freedom to think what they think and often to say what they say. The same freedom that you have too. If we agree on this, then from now on, we agree that anyone can think the worst things in the world about you, and they can also say the worst things about you. I don't want to get into the branch of defamation. Try to stay with me on the principle and concept. Seneca is one of the most well-known Stoic philosophers in the world. At the time, he taught a method for dealing with insults based on 2 principles. First principle: if what's being said is true, then there's no reason to be offended. Nothing wrong has been stated. Only the truth has been reported. Would you get angry at someone for saying, "You're a human being"? It would make no sense. However, if what they say is true and we still feel hurt, it means we need to work on ourselves. In that case, the person has just given us a gift, teaching us that we can still improve. Second principle: if what's being said is false or inaccurate, once again, there's no reason to be offended. This person has just said something that doesn't make sense. Would you get angry at someone who says, "You are not a human being"? It would make no sense. However, if we know what's being said is false, and yet we still feel hurt, it means we need to work on ourselves. So once again, that person has given us a gift, teaching us that we can still improve. So before reacting or responding, always ask yourself, is what they said true or false? And remember the final conclusion in either case. The demonstration I've just given is incredibly valid. In theory, if we were purely logical beings, it would be enough to stop taking things personally. But of course, we're not just made of logic. Our emotional side plays a huge role. So prepare yourself for the second secret weapon. Second secret weapon. There are 6 steps to manage this emotional part of us. Step number 1. Recognize that you've taken it personally. This shouldn't be too difficult. As we've seen, when we take something personally, we're interpreting an action, comment, or behavior as an attack or offense. This interpretation leads us to have an emotional reaction, where we experience one or more unpleasant emotions, so we can move on to step number 2. Create space. If something strikes and bothers you, try to stretch the time between stimulus and response. Often, when our pride is hurt, we respond impulsively, but if we can recognize this impulsive urge and create space, then we'll be able to break the chain of impulsivity and can move on to step number 3. Recognize and accept the emotion you're feeling. It may seem counterintuitive, but the moment we fully recognize and accept our emotions without judgment, we make them easier to manage. If they're easier to manage, the probability of responding in the way we want drastically increases. The emotions indicating you've taken something personally can include anger, frustration, resentment, hatred, or sadness. Ask yourself, what emotion am I feeling? Step number 4. It's not you, it's them. When someone criticizes or judges you, remember, it's not about you at all, but about them, their problems, their needs, their desires, their way of seeing the world. It's not you, it's them. A famous psychologist, Marshall Rosenberg, often said, "Behind every criticism or judgment lies an unmet need of the person expressing it." So your task is to translate any criticism or judgment into this question: what need or desire of this person has not been met? This perspective changes everything. It dismantles one of the core pillars of taking things personally, the interpretation of an action, comment, or behavior as an attack or offense. The person in front of us isn't attacking us, they're simply saying, "I'm struggling." The focal point of this step is not to conclude that you can never be wrong or that any criticism is unfounded. It's quite the opposite. Using this step, you won't take things personally, allowing you to truly listen to what the other person is trying to tell you. Now we can move on to the next step. Step number 5. Always ask for clarification. Never jump to conclusions. Try to better understand the situation by asking for clarification. Ask the person in front of you to specify what they meant by what they just said. You'll often find that you misunderstood or the person didn't intend to say what they said. Step number 6. Once the situation is clear, ask yourself, has the intensity of the unpleasant emotions I was feeling significantly decreased? If the answer is yes, you're in a good place. I'm sure you'll be able to handle the situation well. This is because we've eliminated or almost completely reduced the second of the 2 fundamental pillars of taking things personally: unpleasant emotions. Great job. But what if that's not the case? If instead you feel that the intensity of the unpleasant emotions is still quite high, end the conversation. Sometimes there's no need to say anything. The conversation ends on its own. Or other times you need to say something. What could you say? Well, you have 2 options. The first is to say something like, "What you said hurt me, and I feel the need to take some time to think about what happened." This phrase is fantastic because you're not judging the other person. You're saying, "I am hurt and I need time." However, I understand that not everyone can use this in emotionally intense moments. It takes courage and vulnerability to admit that something hurts you, so you can use this second option. I'd prefer to talk about this topic later. Once you've taken this break, you have 3 options. The first is to re-watch this video. It will help, trust me. The second is to process your emotions alone. The third is to work through the situation and what you're feeling with someone you trust. Sometimes a friend or partner is enough, while other times you may need a more professional figure, like a coach or therapist. At this point, it's essential that I explain something to you. There are situations where it's better and more useful to prevent rather than cure. One of the most common mistakes of people trying to improve themselves is that they tend to believe that they always and only have to work on themselves, which, believe me, in most cases is true. But there is a minority of cases where there isn't much else you need to do on yourself. Sometimes you just need to change what's outside of you. There are people who communicate in a hypercritical critical way. Out of every 4 sentences they say, 1 is to judge something or someone. There can be dozens of different reasons behind this hypercriticism. Sometimes asking them to stop saying certain things simply doesn't work. In this case, depending on the level of relationship you have with this person, you can decide how much to invest in this relationship. For example, if this person is your wife, divorcing after she's said something you specifically asked her not to for the second time is not a great strategy. In that case, trying and trying again to find a solution is the most sensible choice. But if this person is just an acquaintance, you don't need to invest so many resources. It's always wise to try to build a communicative bridge and make your position understood. But if this isn't respected, it's okay to end the relationship. I know, ending relationships can be incredibly difficult and painful, but at the same time, it can be the best thing for everyone. Oh, don't get me wrong, I see you. I know you're looking for an excuse to tell your wife or husband to fuck off. Let me tell you a story. I once met a couple where the wife, every time the husband made a mistake or forgot something, would tease him, even in front of others. Once at a family lunch, he forgot to close the gate. And she commented with a laugh, "Mr. Forgetful, the day he stops forgetting something every day, I'll start worrying." The husband saw these jokes as attempts to ridicule him. This behavior made him feel frustrated and angry. He didn't feel respected by his wife anymore. The main problem with this story is that the husband had never communicated this frustration to his wife. To him, the situation was obvious. He believed that his look and attitude after such comments were enough to make her understand that it bothered him and that she shouldn't do it anymore. Clearly, this strategy never worked, as the wife never changed her behavior. After chatting with the husband for about half an hour, I managed to make him understand that his wife couldn't read his mind, and that it wasn't her responsibility to even try. It was essential that he expressed his emotions in a way that would allow his wife to understand him without feeling attacked. He said to her, "When you called me Mr. Forgetful and said you'd start worrying the day I stopped forgetting something every day, I felt hurt and frustrated. I thought you were trying to ridicule me in front of everyone, although I believe that wasn't your intention. Could you tell me what your intent was?" She replied that of course it wasn't her intention and that it was just a contextual joke, and she didn't know it bothered him that much. She said she was sorry. The husband then asked, "If it's not too hard for you, it would really help me if you could avoid that type of humor about my forgetfulness. Believe me, it bothers me too when I forget things, and I'm trying to improve. Is this something you think you could do for me?" The wife never made that kind of comment again. We've reached the final secret weapon. It's called, "What if it were a child?" When was the last time you took a child's angry comment personally? Hard to remember, right? For some reason, when it comes to children, they can say the most horrible things in the world, but we never take it personally. Maybe because, considering them children, we know they say a lot of nonsense and untrue things. After all, children don't understand the world the way we do. They have many shortcomings and a distorted view of the world. One of the most powerful strategies I use to avoid taking criticism personally is to imagine the person criticizing me as a child. The next time someone makes an unpleasant comment that hits you, before responding, imagine that person as a child, saying the exact same comment in a little child's voice. You'll see that instead of feeling anger, you'll feel compassion for the child. You'll see a little being who is suffering and trying to express some inner discomfort. When we see a child in distress, we often feel pity or compassion, not anger.